All right, what's up? Chris
What's that?
here. Kevin and I started doing a bunch of episodes here, I guess, like, I don't know how long it's been, over a year ago. And we started with the premise that you could have, model proper conversations between uh, people who've left church and people who are still in church. Why am I talking like that? I'm mimicking Jim Bennett because they had the great big idea and started doing that too recently. I guess we could pull it up from Pinecker and all that stuff. And we're not saying it's like some sort of like a revolutionary idea that nobody's ever done before. We've been here and we've been doing it, and we're not super consistent with these episodes, but we want to be a little bit more consistent. We recorded a new one with a person that was brought to us by Guatemax. Guatemax is somebody who I had on pretty recently. She's been on the Midnight Mormons, and she was somebody who a few times, well, sometimes in her past when she was defending the church, she'd used the Desnat hashtag. So she got excoriated by Jim Bennett and other people for using that. Although she's not one of the worst actors in that realm. Although, according to Jim Bennett, if you use any sort of memery that uses a gun in any way, shape, or form, that means you're beyond the pale or something like that. But here's a little old me, post ex-mormon, whatever. I'm able to talk with her, and there she's perfectly fine, and she brought somebody on. I think he was the person who did the rap, right? Jim Bennett thought all that was just so unbelievable. Just can't talk with them. And I know the Midnight Mormons are upset, and they pin on these guys some of the stuff that these guys didn't do, just because at one point or another something they did was had a Desnat hashtag with it. I didn't realize this until Guatemax showed it to me. Was just a hashtag. It was just a hashtag people used for saying we're gonna just put some defense of the church out here. It doesn't mean I am now part of some group of
White
all
nationalists.
white nationalists, white Christian nationalists, insurrectionists, or something like that. But
Violent extremists.
yeah, I remember when the term alt right came out way back when. That initially it was just people saying, "Hey, we're the right wing, but we're not neoconservatives." But then, as soon as Richard Spencer used it once or twice, then all of a sudden, everybody who ever said it was,
Was
well, that's
guilty
part of
by
this.
association.
Yeah, and that's the smear game that happens. And at this point on the internet, everybody should be fully aware of that on either side. Like, if you're using it, you should be cringing that you're using it still, because most people, except for boomer old idiots, like, I won't say who's a boomer old idiot, but get the what that smear game is, the association thing, or trying to link what somebody says in the comment section and make somebody responsible for what's said in the comment section, which could be done to anybody who's on the internet. I mean, all this stuff is new, but it's not new anymore. It's 10 years old. But even when it was 2 years old, I was already like, come on, you guys. Like, get beyond this. Like, we know what the tactic is. We know what the game is. We know what the freak out is. Like, take each person as themselves, an individual who has their own opinions, and stop with the smearing, because we know that the smearing is just ultimately just a reason to use to not have to address people's opinions, or to boot them out of the Overton window, or to not have to
Mm-hmm.
talk to them, or something like that. What's most ridiculous to me is what's outside of the Overton window these days. you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not even like it's really outrageous stuff. Like, so much of what's happened is we booted people who are what was very mainstream LDS in the 90s out of the Overton window, just by freaking out at memery type stuff. But all it really was is people who defended the proclamation of the family type stuff.
Mm-hmm. You're
Anyway,
Desnat adjacent, Chris.
yeah. But if you associate with anybody, you're now part of the thing. So I wanted to call this thing free associations. But anyway, Kevin and I want to get back to talking and showing, not showing or modeling it. I mean, part of what I do. I mean, I said on the recent podcast, like I can put on two hats. We can pretend that we're all Captain Atheist and nothing that has anything to do with metaphysical. We can just shoot it all down. But the problem is, like, if that's the hat we're gonna wear, we're not gonna pick and choose. You know what I mean? You don't. Bill Real doesn't get his mysticism inside of that. Little witches don't get their mysticism inside of that. Neoplatonists don't get their mysticism inside of that. I don't. Even the God of Spinoza, like if you're gonna play that game, it's gonna be hard materialist all the way down, and I think almost nobody holds to that very well. But if we are gonna put on the other hat and say, hey, maybe there's something bigger than our understanding happening in the universe. Kevan and I initially talked about Jonathan Pajau and Vanderklay, and those are two people who are, I noticed, using religious language, talked very, very closely to understanding different philosophies the same way that I understood all the philosophies, only they came through it through religious language.
Mm-hmm.
Kevan and I have noticed over the years that we understand stuff a lot the same in the world of politics and that sort of deal through religious language. And well, I can, like, if I put on the religious language hat, to me, it makes almost the same exact sense as the secular language. In fact, in some ways, it describes stuff better. And I feel perfectly comfortable entering into that realm, like, again, and understanding things from that realm, and even saying, hey, maybe there's more going on than I ever knew. And part of why I say that is there's definitely seems to me to be fruits that come from that and things that are seen from that beforehand that I was caught dumbfounded and I was blind to. There's no other way to say it. I've humbled myself to that a little bit. And so when I go talking with religious people who I think have many of the same values as me, I accept and start listening to and put on an open hat of talking about the same things in the same language. And that's what I'm modeling here. And I don't come into it snide and critical. The Jim Bennett podcast of course, is going to always start from the framing. We're going to model how we can together, both of us, criticize the church because we're better than it. That's okay. That's your angle, but that's a specific angle. There's another side to that, Jim Bennett, and one of the sides of that is that the people who've left aren't charitable, and many of those framings come from a framing that really aren't charitable. Even when they think they're charitable, they aren't charitable, and they aren't actually thinking or listening or turning back. That whole critical framing is a framing. It's a lens. Like, if it's not, we've talked a lot about lenses are cool. Welding a lens on isn't cool, but I'm more than positive they're going to weld a lens on. When I want to go back and talk about it, I want to talk about it in the senses of Jordan Peterson, the rescuing your, and I've talked a lot about the oikophobia, of the self-hatred of the ex-Mormon community and all that stuff. And I am of the belief that the culture we grew up in was good. I have that presupposition that it was good, and going back and re-examining, not just good, like particularly good, and that many of the beliefs of that system are not, maybe you aren't, none of us critical thinkers, I'm not even, especially not critical theorists, are going to be the ones who can take a scalpel and go and scalpel out the good parts and leave behind the bad parts and make a better society. I think you have to stop, sit back and understand and look at the good people that were around and their beliefs, and take off the critical theorist hat a little bit and just find fault with every single thing in the world and notice what's good, and then notice what's good about each other, and maybe chill out on the beliefs, or even reevaluate like a bunch of the beliefs to try to understand them in a different way than you ever had before. Maybe not, but that's what I'm doing.
Me too.
So I wanted Kevan to come on because we were talking about it yesterday, and we usually have little discussions about what we were doing. I think it's going to be cut out of this because we talked a little bit more with Guatemax at the end, and then we decided that the stuff we said is partial stuff that we want to go into more depth in the future. So we're going to cut out the partial stuff and get more in depth into it. And some of that is the whole point of she's felt that she didn't get her chance to speak her piece when she was on with the Midnight Mormons, and the fact that there is certain levels of people in the church thinking that they can wash themselves of other people in the church, wash themselves of those other people in the church by crapping on like the other people in the church, and by doing that they'll be accepted into Babylon, and it's ridiculous, because all I've seen is the same exact people try to get painted as the evil, horrible Desnat themselves, and there's no escaping it. There's no rubbing it off. I've talked about it a lot. I pulled up an article from the Atlantic in 2001, right after January 6th, where this Mormon guy was just apologizing for, oh, please don't take the Book of Mormon from us. Please don't take this. Please don't take that. And nope, you get smeared just as bad. But I am actually of the belief too, if you understand how Maoist revolutions work, that you ex-Mormons, you don't get to say, hey, I left and I called them out. No, you're just as canceled. Like, if these people would want to, say you're all beyond the pale, all you would ever get to do in that world is just be an endless apologizer, endless struggle sessions. What if Jim Bennett's going to enter into that arena? All we're going to see is groveling, apologizing for show after show after show after show after show, when at the same time we know that most of what he spends his time doing on the internet is being a weenie and barking at people. So we're gonna talk about that stuff more with Guatemax in the future. So, but this episode we just spend more time talking with Leiland and some of what Leiland's. I guess we're gonna go over and more in the future on just how he frames stuff. And part of what we were interested in was Guatemax had pointed out to us that, and the Midnight Mormons do it, that Kwaku gets into other philosophies like Theosophy and what is it, Hermeticism, Gnosticism, and some of the fighting that they've had was about what's your hierarchy of that. Do you put that stuff above or below current leaders or past leaders or stuff like that? And so they got critical or bickered about that, and that turned into big fights. But these guys aren't. Leiland's not here to have some major fight about. He's just showing how he mixes it into his LDS belief and how he subordinates that stuff to the LDS belief. It's in there. He understands it because he thinks everybody and everything was always kind of talking about the same stuff, but the LDS tradition and Joseph Smith, in their belief, is the one who really brought it all together. And
one of the things that I think about is and being a believer or not, you can't really dispute the ideas, let's say, put forth in the scriptures, particularly the Book of Mormon, about pride. And I think that the thing is that in conversations, and you look at the whole gatekeeping, and you look at all the when your pride blinds you, it doesn't allow you to converse with people. So if you get triggered, let's say, I think triggering can be a mechanism of self-pride, of you are not allowing, you're getting offended essentially about certain, a collection of words, let's say, that paints maybe a religious picture or a political, idea or whatever. And people get triggered by it, and they shut off, they shut down, and our conversations can't happen. And I think that's what I see Jim Bennett doing that a lot. I mean, he shuts down, things, and the whole finger wagging thing. It all, whether it's a finger wagger within the church, you're not living up to to all the standards, or it's a finger wagger outside of the church, you know, that's saying, you know, oh, now you're a part of a cult or all this stuff, you know, and you should do better and be better and do the work and all this stuff, you know, wherever, you know, it's, and I think one of the things that I've appreciated about talking about with Chris is that, you know, I've never felt like that way talking with you ever, you know, and I think that's something that we've been able to sidestep and just explore ideas, even if they seem out there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think there's fun. Like I've said in the past, like, why are the Midnight Mormons having all the fun talking about stuff, and then the ex-Mormons, they get so insular about being critical about stuff, and then all the fun is gone talking about anything that's interesting or anything should be on the table to discuss and talk about. But you also cut stuff off if you're just gonna be like, I don't care about this, I don't believe in it. And
Yeah.
But if you feel that way about talking about things, because one of the things that we're doing is I'm looking back and seeing what sort of LDS beliefs really speak to me and line up to me politically, but I also am trepidatious about me just doing political union with religion the same way the other side does political union with religion, you know. So I'm curious, and we're meeting and talking about that stuff, and we're reviewing it and all that stuff. But I also don't want to try to, you know, overtly politically change or politically realign or politically influence. I'm trying to understand what is there or what has been there and why the people who I do align with believe how they believe. And if there's anything that I put an activism to, it's not to change anybody. It's to keep the thing that was already there that I liked, if that makes any sense. And that there's an activism in that, or a conservative activism, I'd say. It's like, hey, conserve that, hey, conserve that, hey, conserve that. But it's not something I'm pushing them to. I'm in the camp of saying, I mean, it's the very first, or the tag video that I put on here is called like Stay Mormon. And that was like a bit of a double meaning. Like I was saying, you know, the ex people should go back and reevaluate and find out what they love. Kevan and I talk a lot about, like, so much the ex-Mormon stuff seems a little bit like a teenager hating daddy.
Yeah, and it's not just that; it transcends and goes beyond that. When we look at our the national level, you know, it's like it's beyond just the ex-Mormon conversation. It's also the Christian conversation. It's also the Judeo-Christian conversation within America. It's the whole idea of we need to deconstruct the patriarchy.
Yeah,
you know,
and part of what Kevan and I might be hoping to do too is because, like, we've noticed, like, so what happened in the whole Desnat thing, there's a bunch of reactionary thinkers. We've brought them up a million times, like Curtis Yarvin, the Distributist, Aaron McIntyre, a million different people in that world. Bennett's Phylactery is, they're people in a reactionary scene. You could even put Mary Harrington and Louise Perry in that camp and that sort of stuff. They're reactionary, and they're saying, hey, we're going to play this wiser now, in the sense of, we're very, very aware of how you guys can counter meme or pearl clutch to a point that we destroy any movement that you guys try to, or any unification, or any sort of, like, one of the things about January 6th, and this is so much of what Aaron McIntyre talks about. I highly recommend his channel, because he gets into a lot of stuff that's called Italian elite theory. And it's interesting. It's interesting to learn. It's interesting to find out that there's all sorts of conservative or right-wing philosophy that most people have no idea even exists, because it's just gate kept out of any sort of academia. And, you know, I'm talking about, like, the old philosophers, starting from, like, Thomas Carlyle, Maistre, Mosca, Spangler, who I bring up a bunch, James Burnham. There's, like, a whole world of thinkers that, if I just, like, said that list right there, if we had a different academia, the names you just would have heard would have sounded to you like Freud, like Marcuse, like these names that, like, everybody kind of knows now. If there was a different, like, these people were the level of philosophers that, if the institution had a different political bias, which we've all pointed out has a bias, everybody would know those names as quickly and as easily as they know the name Rawls or Hobbes, right? But no, if they're gate kept out. And one I don't, you could say Carl Schmitt is somebody who they bring up a lot. Heidegger's somebody they jump to. Heidegger has broken into more mainstream name. But one of the things they talk about is power and how political power works, and pointing at things like, hey, part of the point of the political power of the Leviathan of the left is the right can't organize. They can't organize and do stuff that seems like violent or even seemingly violent marching, but the left can. Like we it's something called like anarcho tyranny. Like the left's allowed to like wave the hand and not make major scenes of Antifa and those types of deals, or not put that on the news, or act like it was nothing, or people can go burn down what they did in Portland and or so many other places. Like they burned down the Capitol. They threw Molotov cocktails at a Capitol. And I remember Andy Ngo was counting it. It was up to like 130 days. And I was watching that on Twitter live almost every single day going, what on earth is happening? How is this not just getting shut down? Because it would be called tyranny. But then if the right wing goes and does one January 6th event, which was by all means way less violent than what we've been watching over like a year and a half. And it's not saying like going and if they actually did break into stuff, because there's all sorts of dubious things about being let in and all that sort of deal. But that's part of the deal. Is part of the idea is they wanted them to organize so that they could make a scene of it and go, oh my gosh, look at them organizing, because they've got the media on their side to make a scene of organized action on the right and to ignore the organized action on the left. But this stuff isn't just accidental. Like there's thinkers who've talked about this stuff for 200 years. Actually, it goes all the way back to Edmund Burke. It goes all the way back to the French Revolution. We are still dealing with French Revolution thought. And there's also kind of another reason why I bet you most people didn't study the French Revolution very much. Like we said, the universities haven't been whitewashed, they've been redwashed. Kids don't learn much about the French Revolution, much about Mao, and nothing about Mao. I mean, sometimes they don't even know who Mao is. Nothing about Stalin. And if we were in like an even world, we would know all these names as much as we know, Hitler, Mussolini, and we would know all these philosophers. Not that everybody know everything about them. It's just they would know the names. Like if I said those names, like if I asked some people on the street, "Who have you heard of Mussolini?" Yeah, I've heard it. Have you heard of Thomas Hobbes? Yeah, I think I've heard that name. But they're not going to have heard of James Burnham, But anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying something that Kevin and I might want to do too, is let the LDS people who are being defenders, or what they would call NRX reactionary stuff, know that there's other people who are in that fight or in that thought process, and part of what their thought process is to how do we go about doing this and not get smeared like that again. And it's not like they have that perfectly figured out, but there's a ton of thought in that world. There's a ton of people talking and discussing and thinking about it. It's just you have to step outside of your little corner of the world to see some of it. And Kevin and I also looked at like national talkers like Vanderklay and Pajau and those guys who kind of reframe religious language symbolically, so it could be maybe more understood by people who want to take it on charitably. And I don't know what else. We're going to talk about more about how the whole game of trying to smear people who are partyists so that you get called not one of them usually only makes you look just as smeared as them, in the sense of we're all going to get framed as Mormon, ex-Mormon, whatever. If we grew up in and around this stuff, under the Maoism of current Babylon, you're equally guilty. The other thing we talked about with Guatemax, but we're going to cut that part because we're going to do more later. We talked about a boulder getting rolled down a hill, and a lot of what we talk about is I'm going to say it again, like Jacob Hansen had the argument with Bill Reel. Bill Reel asked him, what sort of revelation did a prophet, seer, and revelator give in the last 30 years that was something amazing? And in the middle of that, I said, well, one of those words is seer. One of the things that I think you can't argue about, at least to me, especially if I look at Ezra Taft Benson or the Family Proclamations, there seems to be, they saw things, they saw what I couldn't see. And then Bill Reel's bragging like, they didn't know the morals and I knew the morals. Well, they saw stuff going away that I didn't see. But one of the jokes that was said on Aaron McIntyre with Freedom Tunes, Seamus, he said, if I roll a boulder down the hill, there's a lot of people who maybe like me or what are called, James Lindsay might call them like the very smart people on the internet who say, well, I thought that boulder was going to stop halfway down the hill. And anybody who didn't think that, I said, slippery slope fallacy. And we were like, but wait a minute, that's not like the boulder got pushed down the hill. We're watching a boulder down and I didn't notice, I didn't see that it was a boulder, and it's kind of ridiculous to call stuff a slippery slope fallacy if you see a boulder halfway down a hill rolling. That's kind of one of the ideas we're talking about, because so much of what I tend to believe is the Spenglerian vision, a little bit of how societies move towards entropy, how like the stages of moving towards philosophy, stages moving towards galaxy brain type stuff is actually a form, it moves towards more antinomianism, less pronomianism, which is like, so less rules for yourself. And we get a little bit into the idea of mind control and ruling and rules. And part of what I've looked at through some of those philosophers is the idea of like the pronomian, highly metaphysical believing society flourishes. It can get tyrannical, a la Peterson, but over time it moves towards super philosophical, antinomian, hedonistic, and that might look like progress, like for a minute, but then it blows itself up. And that's what Spengler noticed through history. But then if you go back and talk to the LDS, so much of what Kevan and I have noticed over the years is so much of this stuff, so much of the philosophy was inside the LDS tradition, and you didn't need like the name Heidegger. You didn't need the name Spengler. You didn't
because it's called the pride cycle. What's this?
Mhm.
I mean, yeah.
In the Heidegger stuff we talked about, like, well, from when we were young, we were talking about, are you what you are, or are you are what you're doing? And there's so much thought of that inside of the LDS world. It's like, well, why do you could go get into Heidegger and scramble your brain up with that, but it was already there in like a tradition. This is one of the things about religious tradition, is in a less boring, long-winded galaxy philosophy bro way, it introduces brains to all sorts of deep thought like this in ways that unite
but
people.
Also the practical application of it.
Practical application, and has people go and participate in ritual. Through that ritual, they all face the same direction. Through the different little behaviors, like things like wearing garments and all that sorts of stuff, they put you in mindsets. There's all the, and it's some orientation, all that stuff. And Leiland gets into that stuff in the sense of like, there's so much on the like the left-wing thought, like that's just mind controlling yourself, that's just tricking yourself. Leiland and Kevan might say like, that's take out the word just. Like, yeah, I'm getting into a situation where I'm putting myself in the framing, where I'm going to control my thoughts, where I'm going to stay focused on what seems of highest value to me, and I'm going to do all these little tricks, and a bunch of those tricks are tricks like participating, tricks like serving, tricks like the ritual, tricks like the service, tricks like it's not. And now we're only kind of putting that in the framing of understanding it, because it's been so deconstructed that the actual going back and constructing it back up is going back and looking and say, hey, what was working there? What were we doing? But not from some sort of like, after most deconstructors like take it all down and say, well, I like the part about, they keep saying, I can keep the parts that I like. And what parts do they even keep? Like, don't kill. But they leave off like generally the stuff of wait a minute, you don't have a community anymore. Wait a minute, you don't. Here and there, they've tried to figure that out, but why doesn't it work? Why does it fall apart? Why does it get all the same infighting? It's because you're just like a group of people who are sitting there in the critical theory mindset, not in the unified value mindset. And doing the actions and little behaviors and little things that you didn't know that like Joseph Smith didn't sit there and say, I've got all these little tricks. I'm going to put all these little tricks together and all these little tricks will mind control everybody. Like it's bigger than that. That's low resolution thinking. And it's really interesting to me. It's really interesting to me to go back and look at the tradition that I think made a good world, which even if it wasn't, I mean, I heard Brett and Heather Weinstein talking just yesterday, and they were talking about the 90s, and they said, well, everybody's nostalgic for the 90s because they said we were doing great. And then somebody like Dan McClellan will say, this is such an ignorant thing. You ain't doing great. There's people like, what? It wasn't there. It was on the right tracks. It was on the right tracks. And now we've got this, we took it off the tracks. And so much of that is like looking back and saying, well, what the LDS church was on a track. And even the track that was on, the critical people get critical of, saying it wasn't perfect from the start. It should be perfect on the start, or it's proof that it's false. Like, no, it was on a good track. It was tracking, and it was tracking right. And I thought I give credit to it for being building one of the most pluralistic, best. You can't tell me that Utah in the 90s, if we brought in any immigrant, any homosexual person, any whatever, that they'd have some little struggles here and there. But if you compared bringing that person into most any other society in the world throughout all history, like that society was equally good for them, and then also equally good for most people. It was just one of the best societies you could ever imagine. It was about the utopia in the sense of being on the right track, of being pluralistic and open to everybody, which comes with it, I think, a bit of a necessity that society has its own little in-group growth, flourishing religious community in it. Like that's part of what you need. It's part of Kevan frequently says it's the tax that you pay to have that good society. And things have gone haywire since then because everything's also critical. But of course, there's other societies that were good enough. But I think what the point is like everything's on those cycles, and like certain places that say they've gotten, well, we got way more liberal and way more open in this place by 1960 or whatever. Yeah, and San Francisco turned into San Francisco way faster. Like it's you're just in the middle of a process. You're just in the middle of an entropy process that's it's going to burn out and say, so sure, maybe like 50-20 years in San Francisco was the perfect place, but it's going to flame out. And even worse, most of the stuff's, we believe, going to flame out harder in the next 20-30 years. And part of what we're looking at is how we think the people who saw it kind of going this way in the past see it going even worse in the future. And that's one of the things Kevin and I look at like a whole lot is, you can call that conspiracy thinking or whatever, but I bet you, like most of the conspiracies recently, we'll be sitting here in 10 years going like, well, another conspiracy checked in the box.
I just think it's being aware of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And like paying attention,
Yeah. And part of it is, I think Kevin and I both think, I think everybody feels in their bones like, got to be ready for what's coming. And in some sort of way, you got to unify with what was your people. Because I feel that coming. And you could just point at stuff like signs in the economy, or signs in the global movement, or major movements towards. We were just looking at yesterday, Heather Haying and Brett Weinstein's podcast, I think just yesterday on May 28th or something. They talked about how this Scientific American was saying women shouldn't breastfeed because that's unnatural, and all babies have rights to have formula. And then they got into the Nuremberg stuff of how the COVID stuff basically broke all the different Nuremberg laws. Kevan shared with me a clip of, where was that? That was the European
Yeah, European Union or something like that.
Talking about some crazy detail from Kim.com about how the COVID stuff was
Who the guy
100%
was, but
a profit enterprise, and he had receipts for all that. And I think it's pretty obvious to stuff. It's obvious to people if they say, hey, mother's milk is bad, formula good, and government pays for it, that you've got a crazy crony capitalism going on right there. And that's in the middle of all the crazy inflation, and then these net zero nuts saying that we need to take all different stuff away from the same people saying, hey, get your babies on formula. We need to regulate and remove salt. And these are the people who hold levers and run some crap. And that's, I'm just getting to a little itty bitty bits of how stupid it's getting, and how much it's going to fall apart because of the galaxy brains. It's going to happen.
well, that's the thing. It's like these ideas are like, it's like, go look at all of them. Go look at all the things that Chris just said. Like, they want to take salt out of your diet. Like, that's so unreal that most people aren't going to believe that, and they're going to think it's conspiracy theory. No, it's actually somebody saying that who's in high authority, and they are actually going to try to do that. You know, it's kind of the same idea as we're going to get rid of your gas stoves. I mean, President Biden said that one.
Well, that's, you can look deeper into that they're really definitely actually trying to do that and everything. Then they'll try to get rid of gas, and then they try to get rid of any sort of movement. And look at James Lindsay's recent podcast on the Western Holodomor. They're trying to get rid of cement. They're trying to get rid of shipping.
They're trying to get rid of carbon. And guess what you are?
And so much of that stuff, like even the salt thing, is like, well, we just want to drastically reduce it. But the way stuff works in the capitalist decentralized system is people get what they get and they want, and then we, in the free system, sure, maybe there's some overabundance, but it gets to where it needs to go. And if you look at the Austrian economists, you can't centrally plan that. But if they try to centrally plan, we want every human to only have this much salt, you're going to kill a bunch of humans. You're going to remove a bunch of salt, or I guess severely cripple their diets. But it's the same as so much of the stuff they're trying to centrally control, and they're sure they can centrally control if they just get AI bots to start doing it. And that's just one area. Beyond the war side, beyond that, the dollar and the money printing go burr, and that stuff, like stuff's going to topple because of our hubris. And if you think in that moment that having shit on your whole community that you grew up and around of the good, prepared, pluralistic people for the past 30-40 years was the right idea, well, ultimate conspiracy theory hat. Don't think that the same people weren't mind controlling you into that a little bit. So
what is the Overton window? It's mind control.
Yep. That's just our preamble before we go into this. So we're going to talk about the stuff, more stuff about like predictions and ideas in the future, and then ideas of what happened in the past, and the ultimate battle of the good and the evil, and how it's interpreted by these people. And we're going to model how believers or non-believers, anybody can talk about this stuff, and you can not lose your mind about it, and you can free associate with ideas and people, and not worry about Relief Society women, Dana Carvey church ladies pointing at you going, Satan, which is, well, that element's always been there on one side or the other. So. Anything else?
No, I think that's about it.
Sweet. Let's cut it.
Word.
All good. You off to church?
Yeah, here in a couple hours.
Oh, nice. Right on.
Yeah.
Sweet, man. Thanks.
Yep.
All right.
Peace.
Later.
Freestyle and just talk on the more like breaking down of Kwaku's ideas. Like, I have no idea what she's gonna have there. So like,
she's not doing that today. Yeah,
okay, good.
We're gonna do that on a different day. But part of this only thing that we were gonna talk about with that is the reason she suggested you to us is we were getting into the ideas of Kwaku gets into Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Theosophy type stuff, and then she had some Twitter post where he says he actually ranks that stuff higher than his Mormon beliefs, which he says he deleted later. But we were saying, well, yeah, what's that about? And we know a little bit about him. We're a little bit doubtful of him, but she says we also know that some people like there's yin yang to stuff, you know what I mean? And she said that there are some people who kind of situate that stuff better than that, and she suggested you and said that you're somebody who thinks about that. But supposedly some of the infighting that happened to Quaker was just from him prioritizing that stuff, and we didn't follow any of that. She was just telling us, and then suggested that we listen to you because she found out that we're kind of interested in someone's idea.
I think the whole Kwaku issue, and along with, I don't know, call them like cultural battles on online social spaces where Latter-day Saints are right now, and everybody's trying to find their voice, right? How do we participate in the gathering of Israel? How do we put ourselves out there, our ideas? How do we share the gospel? These are all things that everybody's struggling to kind of hone and find. It's been really off-putting to me as an artist who came to Twitter with that in mind. Like, I came to Twitter looking to find audience for my music, because I've been making Latter-day Saint hip hop trap type stuff since I was 15, and I'm almost pushing 40. So like, it's like I realized I was being suppressed with putting out my music and stuff on Facebook and Instagram before they've come out and admitted it now that's what they were doing to Christian artists and things like that. Like, it's not even me to be like, oh yeah, look how good I am, I'm getting suppressed by mainstream news or media or business bureaucracy.
We believe you 100%.
But I noticed that a long time ago, like 2017 is when I started to really realize that my posts were losing traction. I was paying for stuff and nothing was happening. Like, it was a negative feedback loop of trying to market myself. So I took to Twitter knowing that that's like, number one combat space for ideas and just everybody's open thoughts, and found really faithful people there trying to share the gospel like valiantly. And that was everything around this Desnat hashtag before it blew up into being this alt-right punching bag for certain ideologies, right? It became an easy wrap-up smear, if you guys are familiar with that term in like media and politicking, right? Like that you pick an idea or a concept. They do that with us with Mormons all the time, with ideas that we don't believe or espouse. They'll just wrap them into, oh, the Mormons believe in this, or you have horns if you're a Mormon, like just stupid things that get attached to ideas to make them sound more ridiculous than they are. That's what happened the entire time I was with Desnat, that I was participating and using the hashtag to find like-minded people. It was never about this starting some offshoot, nation, Deseret, insurrection like they made it out to be, or anything like that. It was just like-minded people who are witty enough to see that when others don't understand what you're doing, you control them really easy, right? Like you can play along and meme them, and then the people who are more serious, they don't quite understand that. And so maybe that's to the fault of the witty people online that won't compromise when it comes to what's real and what's not. I don't know if I'm making any sense. It's all nebulous anyways as it is.
No, you're talking our wheelhouse.
Okay,
it's 100% what we're most interested in. Only we know more kind of like a national view of it, and we realize that the Desnat repeated what happened on like more of a national, international view of it.
Macro to microcosm. It's really what it is. It's a pattern. Like I'll compare it to this. Like, let's just say the alt-right or QAnon or MAGA movement. Any of those movements over the last 6-7 years, how you've seen the media from the left or center or wherever address them, is the same tactic, pattern, everything that was happening to Desnat and the LDS community within it. It was like a little mini version, iteration of the same type of. I would call it active measures, right? If you're talking politics and communism and subverting a government, and like what I believe is actually happening right now and has been happening for not just since Donald Trump or Obama or whatever, but for hundreds of years, that since the Revolutionary War, that this fight behind the scenes of secret combinations, world domination, world governments, that kind of thing, the consolidation of power is not a new thing that, I'm sorry if your esoteric bro just woke up last year and is reading threads that opens his mind to these concepts and thinks he has it all figured out. And, oh, it was this and that. And they start pointing. That's not how it goes. You've got to go back to the source of where all these things started to begin to fracture, to dissolve. And that's what my whole eternal perspectives is. I haven't gotten to the politicking yet. I haven't got to the modern philosophies yet, like to pick them apart, whether it's Marx or any of these people. I've mentioned them only superficially to place them in the bigger context of the prophetic story. And when I say the prophetic story, I mean the one story. There is no other. When I talk about prophecy, I believe, and can prove and can read the scriptures. And it makes more sense when you realize all the prophets saw the same vision. They described it differently, right? The plan of salvation is the vision. Prophecy is to have the testimony of Christ. And so if you're full of that spirit, you understand the plan of salvation and the purpose of Christ, why he was ordained, why he came down to restore the fall, right? To restore man to an immortal and eternal state that we can be resolved and reconciled for our sins and shortcomings and all the effects of the fall, right? Like that's prophecy, to understand the big picture of the plan of salvation and how that plays out in human history is prophecy. That's why you have prophets like Daniel, who's a political prisoner. All of his prophecies have to do with the political kingdoms of the world versus the political kingdom of God, the kingdom of God, right? Like this fight of Zion versus Babylon began in pre-existence. It's the same thing playing out over the human history. And they're like we talked about with Desnat being a fracture or an iteration of a bigger macro pattern. The same thing is with prophecy, that you have this big timeline, but it also breaks down and repeats in smaller, patterns or cycles of apostasy and dispensations and restoration. And here you have like renewals and revivals and awakenings, and it happens in a cycle. We call it the pride cycle because we have the Book of Mormon. We have a name we can stick right to it. But this cycle of apostasy, of growing and falling and growing and falling, it's natural. We live it in our macro life, from being a young independent or dependent baby to an independent teen to an interdependent parent, right? And then declining again through that same cycle. You fall into a state of like bodily apostasy where your body will not do what it knows it needs to do, right? Because its functioning is losing. So like we live these cycles. We're part of these cycles. Everything we do and we learn, we're participating in these cycles. If you're not applying that to how you're interpreting and looking at history, especially the history of these kinds of ideas that are so impactful and foundational. We're talking about existence. We're talking about cosmology. Why does the world exist? Why do I exist? Why do we, how long is human history? These big questions that people refuse to tackle, right? Because it's almost daunting. It's too much. There's too much out there to explore and sift through. Well, it's all made really easy if you just stick to this prophetic view. If you stick to putting Christ at the center, this bifurcated view of Zion versus Babylon. And if you look at it that way, that literally when Christ is coming and saying, hey, my kingdom is not of this world, he's talking to the same thing that we're going to focus on all day today. And that all the Old Testament prophets were looking forward to in the millennium, the restoration of the same kingdom and glory and situation on the earth that fell before the fall of Adam. Like they're looking to restore that, go back to the golden age, go back to these things. And there's a corrupt version of that is being subverted right now by Babylon. We call it Mystery Babylon. In the book of Revelation is what John sees it as. This last version of the same thing, the same cycle, that's why it's called Babylon, because Babylon was the one who started it in most recent, I would call it the history of the kingdoms that Daniel brings up, right? Because when you have the vision of history and politics and everyone wants to go to Daniel 7, that starts 600 BC to now. Okay. Think about that too, in terms of, I know you guys love philosophy and you guys are well-versed more than me. So in terms of these philosophers and these ideas.
Listen, you're saying almost our exact viewpoint of stuff.
Yeah.
It's coming from a different language.
Yes.
And it's actually a language. I mean, we also get into types of people who talk about how us talking the philosophy stuff ain't it, because it's just too, it's not a good enough way to pass. And I even have that belief myself, because people who want to use philosophy as the positive thing or the negative thing, you realize that can't pass on. I mean, here and there, some, like you said, philosophy bros can get into it, but not the average person. That's one of the reasons those philosophers knew we got to go attack the religious things, because that's where they really do spread the ideas of strength and unity and that sort of idea. And that's what that really spreads. It's not Sam Harris giving people like these big long-winded philosophy things, but even to criticize people I like, trying to go describe to people this stuff and like, well, the Marxists did this and then these guys did this, and it just gets too haywire. Kevin and I, the very first podcast we did, right? we got to start over, because it got so philosophical talking about this stuff, and we said, this is just, we can't do it like this. It's just weeds, and but it's described better through this religious language. But you're saying exactly, it's like right on par with what we talk about, Kevin. Right?
I was listening to some of your episodes and I was thinking the same thing. I was like, dude, these guys are in the weeds in a box talking about philosophy, like in certain boundaries, and they know you guys understand the confusion that is there. And I say, I know why. It's because the foundation upon which all those ideas and everything were established before, like in ancient civilizations, before, we'll just say before Greece, right? even though I know philosophy started even before then, but normally they'll talk about like Thales of Miletus being one of the first, fathers of the grandfather of philosophy. And his big accomplishment in what he did for philosophy to bring it forward into Greek and Roman and, these later kingdoms, and how they elaborated on them and fractured them into so many different avenues. Like you guys like to get into these weeds. But it was Thales of Miletus deconstructing philosophy from mythology. When you pull the mythological traditions and move them away, and then just look at everything logically, and you play the Hegelian dialectic of consensus agreement. That's what he did. He removed it from the think of it in the language of the gospel. Think of it as the spirit of Elijah, the connection to our fathers, to understand and take seriously not just the power of sealing that we understand it as members of the Latter-day Church in doing temple work and providing those ordinances for them through the priesthood, but also the knowledge that they had. Like that's part of the spirit in my mind of Elijah, that if you're listening to your prophets, you're reading their journals, you know what they saw, what they said, what they believed, and you're looking to integrate that into your life, to become one with them the same way. I believe that's exactly what seeking the city of Enoch or Zion in itself, as we're trying to do as a Latter-day Church today. It's that same gospel philosophy and kingdom and established way to live life that's synthesized with the ancient traditions of the past, right? And doesn't try to separate yourself from it to this purely intellectual, metaphysical type conversation. No, you attach it to the temporal, to what is physical, to what is material, because Joseph Smith taught us that. That's the key that you have to have looking at these things, that there is no immaterial matter. So to get into metaphysics at all is kind of a misnomer as a Latter-day Saint, though it's a good vehicle to communicate some of these ideas. But apart from that, it's this decoupling of the temporal, what's real, physical, planets, the sun, space, matter, from what is spiritual, what is intellectual, what is in the brain, that kind of thing. Those shouldn't have been decoupled. And I think that's exactly what Jesus Christ is getting at when he comes back and is restoring his gospel to these people who are being subverted by this philosophy of separation, this philosophy of disassociation. That's what I call it in my writings, is that it's a mind control technique. So you guys have gotten into that episode a bit. This is the grand scale satanic mind control that starts from the beginning. You disassociate from your proper connections to what is real. And that started philosophically in 600 with Thales of Miletus, decoupling philosophy and these ideas of consensus knowledge from the traditions of the fathers. So Hermeticism, Gnosticism, all these things are a reaction to this happening in those early stages of philosophy growing, right? You have these groups breaking out and saying, no, like Jesus taught that there's a literal destruction. No, we really believe that the waters parted and that Moses brought us through supernaturally. We really believe that Yahweh created the earth, that he's this cosmological God, like that things happen. In fact, all through the Bible and the scriptures, what do we have but these stories of astrological things preceding or accompanying the signs of prophecy? Right? Whether it's the new star at the birth of Christ, or it's these same things of the planet doing strange things during Isaiah's days. And you have the destruction of Sennacherib's army by some cosmic jet stream, right? Or something happens where you have these amazing things throughout the scriptures that can't be explained if you're purely detaching from temporal reality. When I say temporal reality, think physical, like material stuff. Like the battle between what is material and spiritual. Everybody wants to separate, especially in the Christian world, philosophical world, those things. Mm-hmm. In my perspective and through this paradigm, you can't do that. And I believe Joseph Smith taught that.
I agree with that 100%. Like that's I guess that's something that I've not really, well, I think maybe I've kind of addressed that as we've been going along, Chris, that, I mean, I've always kind of felt like it's 100% of both. You know, it's not just materialistic. It's not just the spiritual, it's all of it. So I love what you're saying.
I can even place that in some critiques. I've talked about it lately, but like once again, me bringing up these philosophical things, it always kind of hits people like, what's he talking about? But I brought up multiple times to them the idea of because a lot of the people I'm talking to are ex-mormons or people like that who I'm trying to get them to stop and go, wait a second, we've done something here. And one of the persons who's given a large warning about that is Oswald Spengler. But he was a guy who looked at stuff through history, and he said, hey, these things where you guys go and lose your metaphysical attachment to like environment or to like some sort of thing, when you detach the belief of what the thing is or what your people are or what your group are, it always moves into this more kind of high-minded philosophical stuff. And then over time, those civilizations actually move towards collapse They
Yeah,
do
you
not
figured out
move
the pride
towards.
cycle.
Yeah,
Just
it
outside
is
of
the pride cycle. And so you hear these ex-Mormons talk about like fowler stages of beliefs, like it's a progress. Like it's I'm going to progress to this higher minded, higher stage. And now I'm thinking about things. And now I get science. And now I get the philosophy. And, and they cut out the metaphysical attachment to stuff. And then they're like, wow, we're getting to Star Trek. And I keep trying to say, no, that's not Star Trek at the end of that.
Yeah.
The end of that is collapse. The end of that is doing, and there's people who've noted and looked at that through history, that you're deracinating yourself and cut yourself off from these other things. And I'm just saying that there's people in that realm that have noticed it. But then I always say to Kevan, is like, I feel like I went and got in these philosophical worlds and I scrambled up the Rubik's Cube, and all the Rubik's cubing I've been unscrambling, I'm just getting back to where my grandpa already was. And in the meantime, I lost 20 years. And so like I point to like I point to the talk just this week by Dallin H. Oaks, who says, just go have your kids. Just go have your kids. And if you go look at like all these like kind of postmodern traditional people, there was just a conservative conference in England. And there was a lot of these women who are like kind of ex-feminists who lost their 20 years, but are now going back and saying, go have babies now because we miss our babies. We miss our chance to have babies and all that stuff. You listen to Dallin H. Oaks. Dallin H. Oaks says, stop thinking about it. Have your kids. That enrages ex-Mormons, right? But he says, you're just delaying your blessings. You're just delaying your benefits. You're just delaying, and that sort of stuff. And he's just right about that, because then you see these people who went through the Rubik's Cube I went through, and you just have that, like, yeah, all we did was get back to where my grandpa was before the whole time, you know, and going all the way through it, we just lost all this time, scrambling ourselves up, looking at these sorts of things, and then you just get back to kind of these basic truths. But at a larger societal level, you just see the things moving towards what we say is your stages aren't progress, your stages are entropy. It's a type of entropy. And
so one point on that, just to tack onto that, is in one of my essays, I write about how the restoration of the gospel, it didn't stop the great apostasy. Okay. And that's controversial even to say that online. I have some people like, no, you didn't. But what I mean by that is that it stopped it for those who accept the gospel, right? As soon as you accept the gospel, you accept the Book of Mormon, you accept what Joseph Smith did, then yeah, the apostasy stopped for you. And you have a chance to live a Zion-like life, even now, without Enoch and his city being here, right? Like that's the message that we get, is that we have the principles, the fullness of the gospel, in so much that this political, philosophical, all of this integrated kingdom that you desire to have, right? You can find it. You can have it. All the foundation and framework has been restored. Like that's the way that I see it when I'm looking at. I just lost my train of thought. What were we saying? Help me come back and I'll find it. I promise. This happens.
If we were looking at like stages of civilization, or people like scrambling themselves up and then just getting back to traditional values. Kevan and I read this book by Mary Harrington. It's a real famous book right now. It's called Feminism Against Progress. And she talks about this thing. Kevan just got to the end of it, and like she just got all the way back around to
I said the synopsis of the book, the Mormons were right, you know.
Yeah. It plays in this bigger historical drama, though, that we're talking about. Like if we're talking about cycles within cycles, then it's easy to, if you understand the macro cycle, which is easiest to understand, then you can apply it in the microspheres. Like, and that's so my background a little bit. I studied integrative studies in college. So I went to the New School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at ASU. A fancy way to say, like, break down the silos of everybody's specialized, because that's what modern academics is where you've got, you know, let's just put a generic example. You have physicists working on things in nuclear fusion, but not talking to, you know, plasma guys or these guys over here or other things here. And so they're making these discoveries, but they're never communicating.
It's not holistic. It's fragmented.
Yes. And so lots of schools and universities, this is not just like unique to Leiland here, what I did, but like they were opening up these interdisciplinary divisions. But this is not new. In fact, guess what? Joseph Smith was trying to do this from the beginning. All the people that got pushed out by Marx, by Charles Darwin, by Lyell, all these people in the early 1800s who were setting up what I call, and what has been called by others as well, as the restoration of deception that parallels the restoration of truth, because this happens right about the same time in the 1800s as Joseph Smith is called as a prophet of God and light is restored and light all, you know, is poured out. At the same time, Satan's calling his prophets, and they're doing the same thing, and they're instituting
an opposite reaction.
Exactly, these counter ideas that are a fake Zion, right? It's a fake communism that leads to subversion, to subjection, to wicked kings, right? like we're going to talk about with Ezra's eagle and that whole concept or whatever. But these things started to become bifurcated and really separate, like the equal and opposite parallels, like you're saying, in the 1800s. But interdisciplinary arts and sciences has always been a thing. In the 1950s, Immanuel Velikovsky, who's very important in terms of understanding where I'm coming from with this cosmology, he was an interdisciplinary scientist who was shunned by the academic community because of their siloed nature, because he stepped out of bounds and was writing about disciplines that he was not technically credentialed to write about. And so his books were like burned in the 1950s because of the tradition, because of the strict academic, wires that they had around everything. It's still that way to a large degree. But what he did has fundamentally changed, like the revolution happening within certain sciences now. That's what I get excited about when I talk about like an electric universe or plasma universe or these things that fit teachings of Joseph Smith more holistically, talking about bringing temporal and spiritual together than anything that's popular right now, having to do with black holes and dark matter and dark this and dark that. And we don't know. And we're blown away by what we're seeing out in space because it absolutely destroys all of their initial cosmological foundations to say this is what happened with the Big Bang and this is that. It was very naive of us to say that in the early 1900s that, we're this close to having a theory of everything when they were set up on a false foundation. That's what my entire push with this is.
I mean, you look at the regression of just with the whole Enlightenment. I mean, you kind of look at it and it's like we can't even call, we're so screwed up we don't even know what gender is anymore. This
isn't new either.
No,
this is, like we said, in that pride cycle in previous societies and things like this, it's a pattern and we're walking right into it.
Yeah.
Again, history
we're
repeating
on that.
itself.
We're on that down
the luck system, the rat utopia. And this is a book I was reading just recently, just to go along with what you're saying. It's called Range: Why Journalists Triumph in a Specialized World. But it gets into some detail about how the academy has blinded itself through specific expertise, and that they're not able to answer certain questions because they're so specialized. But Guatemax, we haven't even said hi. You popped in. How you doing? Thanks for popping.
Is my audio okay? Does it work?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks for setting this up.
Preparing stuff. Yeah.
It's interesting stuff. So
yeah,
Kevin's talked to me about this forever. So one of the things that happened with Kevan and I is like, I left the church 20-ish years ago, and Kevan didn't. Kevan stayed in. And so much of what I found out, like, because Kevan talked to me about all this stuff forever ago, I go all the way down the rabbit holes and come back around and go, hey, Kevan, you were right about this stuff all along. How'd you do that? How did you do that about stuff that very, very smart people didn't see at all? And somebody was just asking, I don't know if you guys know Jacob Hansen. He's been having these debates with Bill Reel, who's a kind of a famous ex-Mormon guy. And we've been kind of going over those and reviewing what Bill Reel is missing and where Jacob Hansen gets tied up with him. But he just barely put a post. They were talking last night. Bill Reel was asking, like, what revelations have the Mormons done recently that's like some sort of great revelation? The prophets, seers, and revelators, what sort of thing? And, some people bring up stuff which I brought up before, which I agree with, of the family proclamation in the world. But I also said, hey, one of those words in there is seer. They see the stuff. And I would dang well say, I've been around academics and academia and all that sort of thing. They don't see anything. Like, these guys are seers. Yeah. They see it. And Kevan was seeing stuff that I couldn't see, that I had to go the long way through like an idiot. Like, you feel like the galaxy brainwave was stupid afterwards. And the people who just saw it all along were like, that's one of the things I wanted to add to that conversation. Is like, it's not just these big wild revelations, which you're going to get into some of those too, but they see it. They saw it before I saw it. And now I see it. And still I try to explain it to some other people and try to use language that they'll understand it or follow because it's supposedly academic, and that's okay today because the other language isn't. But other people are seeing it way before the galaxy brains who are writing these books about it. It's coming after, like, they're catching up, and people who are on that level or on that sort of thing are I think ahead of the game and that sort of stuff in a really weird way. It's so funny.
I credit Joseph Smith. I think when you talk about what revelations, well, like you don't understand. If you're asking that question, you don't understand what he revealed. Like you don't understand, like fundamentally what he did. If you're still asking, well, what has the church done for me lately? It's like, well, guess what? Even the members of the church, it's like we were given this software that has capability to literally bring and automate everything for you, so that you can go out and study and look at anything and know how to tie it back to the central purpose, to the prophetic vision, the one vision, to your purpose here on earth, and to obedience to Christ. Right? We have the software. But guess what? 99% of members in this church even are using maybe 50% of the software that was given to us. And here we are. And what revelations has the church done lately, guys? Man, it's like, well, guess what? Even in our membership, we are not utilizing what has already been given to us from Joseph Smith. And we're bringing the conversation that we had earlier back into this in terms of the dissociation between the temporal, or the physical and the metaphysical. We'll put it that way, the spiritual and the physical. This disassociation, Joseph Smith put back together permanently through the restoration of the temple and through those ordinances and through the priesthood and through everything that we have, that these doctrines and philosophies and everything, they're all there. We've got 100% the software needed to be able to go out to anywhere, to theosophy, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, all these, anything. You can look at it, you can filter out the truth and place it into this I would call it the tree of life, the iron rod, this pathway, this narrow way. All of it can be honed in by us as the servants, as the stewards, as the shepherds, as the tools and hands and fingers of the Lord right now in these last days. That's what I feel my calling has been. Not that I'm here to reveal this to the church or anything, but I have these questions. And here's the way I see it. Condemnation be upon me for not using the technology, the ability to access information, to learn at accelerated rates like we have now in my time here on this earth. Never before has the technology like exists today for the accessibility to scripture and the words of prophets and truth and actual debate or knowledge or questions you might have had is accessible. All you have to do is ask. All you have to do is look. All you have to do is spend 10 minutes of effort, dang it. You know what I mean? I'm getting angry because you have so many people that would rather scroll on Twitter and ask a bunch of random people questions that have so much worth for their eternal salvation and soul and like existence. To me, I see it so clearly, but it gets down to everybody becomes siloed in some way, becomes specialized in some way, becomes detached from the unification of what is spiritual or ideological and physical.
Phones all the time, just like not seeing.
Well, and talk about seers
in front of us. Yeah.
What is an LCD or an LED but a light emitting diode, a piece of silicon, a stone? Here we are, all of us now in 200 years after Joseph Smith, everybody else wagging a finger back at him for looking at seer stones. And here we are with our faces buried in fake Urums all day long, that are telling us the truth that the world now is cultivating, and Satan is out there pulling strings as the puppet of what you can and can't know, or what is or isn't available on the internet to learn now. So we're in this weird Goldilocks position of the information age right now, right before a big collapse, like you guys have suggested. I believe it, but we're in a revolution, and most of the people don't understand that. They don't know where we are on that cycle. They don't feel that we're at the top of the roller coaster like most of us do. Some of us who are looking at this and have seen this and understand that there are seers who have been saying this for a long time, we know where we're at on the roller coaster and we're braced, right? So as it goes down, we're not going to be flying out. We're not going to be jumping ship. We're not going to be scared. We're not going to be upset. And it's going to be up to us to hold and help others as things start to unravel. But we have the infrastructure, the framework, and the foundation laid by modern prophets, the Restoration, Joseph Smith, to bring all of these collapsing philosophies together. They will coalesce around Mormonism or around the Church of Jesus Christ and these doctrines, right? And the rest of Christianity is going to have a faith crisis, because, and this is where we'll bring in this theosophy type stuff that maybe some people errantly would put above the Restoration and Joseph Smith because of a lack of knowledge, because of ignorance, absolute ignorance, and a desire to be flashy and esoteric, bro, instead of foundationally laying things out line upon line and doing it the right way. Because what is theosophy? But it's this amalgamation, a building of the restoration of this dispensation of deceit, with Karl Marx and everybody laying the way to these communist ideologies that were adopted then through governments throughout the ways. You had that same ideology being collected and rebranded as a religion as well. Because Marx, as you guys know, their ideas was not just to challenge religion, but to supplant it entirely. Right. And the secret combination that seeks to take the freedoms away of all the world that we're warned about time and time again, over and over again in the Book of Mormon. Right. And the Book of Mormon is what? A record for us, written for us, about civilizations that have gone through this falling process, gone through this pride cycle, and they're subverted. And Mormon, Moroni, Nephi, Jesus Christ, Isaiah, all of them, they point to these wicked men in secret combinations who pull the string for governments to take advantage and enslave the people, to have a golden age of their own off the backs and work and actions and agency of those who they practice unrighteous dominion. So yes, all of these things are being brought together to provide a fake Zion to the world. And that's what you see right now with the communist push, and how everybody is okay to be a socialist right now on the left here, at least in America, that they've succeeded in subverting the mind of so many people over generations since World War II, especially, that this communist way is the way to go. They don't remember 100 years ago when Lenin tried to install this and millions and millions of people were murdered based on these same ideas. We're just trying it again because we know it does deconstruct governments, cultures, civilizations, traditions, all of these things, so that it can be replaced and supplanted by these new age philosophies. Theosophy is the religious component of that same Marxist government angle, right? Theosophy is bringing in all of the occult ancient traditions and saying the idea behind it is that, hey, guess what, guys? All of these have a common origination and that we can share that. That's our doctrine. That's exactly what Joseph Smith was saying and did with the temple. So if we take the temple seriously, we will come to the same conclusions. That guess what? All of these ancient cultures going back to Sumeria and written history or whatever you want, they were doing the same things that we have restored now, but we have it in the proper context. So to say something as outrageous as somebody might have said, that theosophy has some type of higher place in their mind than anything Joseph Smith restored, is asinine. It is dumb. It is not to understand what Joseph Smith did in this integration of bringing back the temporal or the metaphysical and the physical. Theosophy is a fake version of that. But that's what appeals to a lot of people who are looking for these alternative ideas, because it's presented very beautifully as this just philosophical way to see things. And wow, wouldn't it be logical that all of these things in the past actually make sense, and they're not just the fanciful imaginations, these mythologies and cultural traditions of ancient cultures. They're not just a primitive people trying to make something up, but that they actually witnessed what they said they witnessed, that they actually did what they said they did, kind of thing. That's the whole idea behind theosophy. She went, Helena Blavatsky was the main prophetess, the proponent who started it and wrote these books that the Theosophical Society is based on, which are The Secret Doctrine. The one that it gets quoted a lot before that was called Isis Unveiled, was her book. But what she did is she traveled all through the Eastern Buddhist, all the Eastern philosophies. Let's just put it this way, not to get into too many weeds with this, but that she went through and collected, think about the mythologies and traditions of these esoteric Eastern religions and brought them to a Western, philosophy focused society to integrate them all. That's the appeal to a lot of people when they say, well, it's more of a universal, inclusive approach to how we're looking at history and looking at the past and looking at these ideas. That's what theosophy is. But what I'm saying, and what I would contend against anybody who would put theosophy above the restoration and the doctrine of the church, is that you're catching a half-baked solution that's 100 years too late, and also involved in the mystery Babylon that's trying to subvert the Zion that Christ is trying to establish right now, or that he will establish.
And they got involved with the UN and all that sort of stuff.
Yes, exactly. So the same people involved in the CFR and setting up this one world big government, they're adopting this theosophical religious worldview. And if you read back to these writings, I know this might get a little bit conspiratorial for some people, but maybe not. But the writings of people like Albert Pike, or going back to the Freemasons and the Illuminati and the French Revolution, even before that, and these same ideas that pushed these things are the same secret combination right now that I believe are pulling the strings of the banks of the world, and as well as the governments right now of the nations, looking to bring them all together.
The Midnight Mormons themselves, on one of their episodes, I can't remember exactly which one, but they were looking at the weird, strange art at the UN building. And they're like, wow, this is all so strange. This is all so weird. I don't know what's going on here. Oh, this stuff looks all creepy and satanic or whatever. Well, if you look into the details of where that came from, it came from the Theosophists. The Theosophists were the ones who put it in there. But then they had another episode where Quaker was saying, hey, let's get into this Theosophy stuff.
Well, and
you guys are, go ahead.
Well, here's the rub on me for this, because on face value, we can have a Hegelian reaction to the theosophy stuff and the symbolism. And that's where I come in and have a really strong passion for symbols in these things, because looking at ancient symbols that theosophy uses, and even Masonry, like Freemasonry and things like this, when they talk about and use these symbols, they interpret these things way different than like popular society would interpret certain symbols and things. And what I'm saying is that the gospel, the true prophetic gospel, and what Joseph Smith did and what our temples represent correctly is the correct interpretation of those same symbols. So to say that theosophy has something figured out that our temples aren't already branding and like broadcasting to everybody who has eyes to see, it just, again, outlines the person's ignorance because they're not seeing what's on the temple or what's in the temple or what Joseph Smith restored. That these same weird UN symbols that maybe are represented in a way that's blasphemous, right? Or inverted or seems just anti-Christ. Well, guess what? Christ, like Satan's not dumb. He will usually take a symbol that's associated with divinity or what he desires to have and will subvert it. That way, when people recognize it initially, what do they think? Oh, it's satanic, like the bull and horns. But you've seen Michelangelo's drawing of Moses where Moses has horns. Like, what's up with that? Right? Like, I know what's up with that. I've studied it, and there's a faithful way to see all of that through what Joseph Smith restored and what we do in the temple. But if you're going to rely,
or is it too long of an answer?
No, I can just get into it. I have a video, actually, if you guys want to check it out on my YouTube channel about the body electric and transfiguration, that I believe that these horns, especially on Moses depicted, because they're depicted on him. If you want to pull it up, just look up like Moses with horns and Google image it, and then you can have that image up. These horns were of him coming down with the 10 tablets from Sinai after having talked with the Lord and being translated. Like, we know that he went there face to face and was speaking with the Lord while the Lord was writing the tablets with his finger, right? And when he came down, he was transfigured to a state where he was bright. He was actually like literally bright and scared the people. The scriptures say that Moses had to come down the mountain with a veil on his face, right? To cover the brightness of his face so that he didn't strike fear into everyone because he came down as the messenger of the Lord. That was what he was inviting all of the people of Israel to do, to come up and experience that kind of communication with the Lord, right? So you see these horns on Moses and everybody's like, oh, satanic. And there's this whole esoteric weird, you can go down this rabbit hole where everybody wants to claim that Moses and Yahweh are actually the devil. And the Israelites and the Jews were all, deceived by the devil.
Yeah, you get into that.
Exactly. It's where you lose
the demiurge type stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's
well, and even in mythology, like talking Joseph Campbell or like Jung or any of these people, when you want to get into the demiurge or whatever, like, again, this is the same symbolism that we see at the beginning of Genesis with the serpent taking over the image and symbol of Christ as the serpent and regeneration and all the positive things that come along with the serpent symbolism. And that also has ties to my plasma electric universe and the creation and what we do in the temple and stuff. Like, all these things are intertwined and connected when you see them through this perspective. But if you're just coming at it from this like frantically minded, trying to get attention on social media and trying to say the most outrageous things to get likes and clicks, well, you're going to fall into these same dang stupid esoteric traps that I see every esoteric bro on Twitter who doesn't have the gospel, who doesn't have a testimony of Jesus Christ or the restoration, who has no clue where we're at in the timeline of prophecy in these last days, that says, oh, I know the truth now. And here it is. In 2023, nobody else knew this about Moses, but he's actually the devil. It's like, give me a break. This is where we're at, though, that these things are more appealing than people actually taking time to sift through and read the truth, to find the truth, to test God, to actually pray, to do the meditations, to do the work and plant the seeds. They want instant gratification, just like we have for the last 20 years in all of modern society. So just the horns, what do they represent? In a plasma electric universe where you're talking about literal catastrophe happening, that's what happened with the Exodus, that there was some type of cosmic catastrophe that took place to part the seas, to kill the Pharaoh and his armies, to lead the Israelites through the wilderness as a pillar of fire and of smoke. Like, and the whole rest of the nations around were in terror because the Israelites, as they marched around into the promised land. Like, this is history. We read it in the Bible, but we don't believe it. A lot of members will be, oh, it's all metaphorical and spiritual, and they'll try and excuse it away when it sits there bold-faced in front of us, along with all the other instances of catastrophe that we have in the scriptures, including, by the way, in the Book of Mormon, what is 3rd Nephi but an entire catastrophe event where the entire face of the Western Hemisphere is changed in a matter of 3 hours? How does that happen, right? I thought it was all gradual processes that take millions of years for things to happen and change and cities to be buried and blah, blah, blah. But no, it was some type of cosmic catastrophe caused by passing bodies, and that's why they called them Passovers, because there were cosmic interactions between planets as they were settling in this new orbit. Now, I introduced a whole lot of new topics there just by saying some of those things, but this is what we believe. This is what Joseph Smith restored. And I am sad to see that so many members of the church don't even know that, don't even understand what Joseph Smith restored in terms of these ideas of where we come from, what the planet is like, why. And because they don't dive into these things, because they don't dive into the Doctrine and Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price, the temple, right? They get swept up in all this other external stuff because it's there and it's ready to provide these answers as they ask them. But instead of doing the hard work and finding out through the proper channels, we get swept up in wanting to be popular with some new opinion, where that's not how it is. And people will have accused me of that. You have some new opinion. No, everything I talk about, I back up with scriptures and my sources and my sources. Not one person since I put my essays up has come back and be like, well, actually, this is not true because you're not correct here. No, I've got a real simple, and if I could share my screen, maybe I'll show you these points that I have about cosmology and the restoration, that I look at all these other things at with and through. So how do I share my screen?
Yeah, there should be a present like type of option or something like that.
Okay.
So while he presents his stuff, let me just say something. Yeah. So yeah, as you can see, he knows how to speak. Like Leiland, he's the guy who knows all this stuff, and that's something that we're saying here in the beginning is the filtering out of what's actually good to just a few to represent the whole. As you go to expose, there's a whole block list of to block every single one who has ever used DesNet. But then they present just the very few to be that of the whole. Like if you look at Leiland, he's not the white supremacist, that stuff that only those very four. It's always the same seats that's presented
you got
as
to
the whole.
You got to smear them out of the Overton window so they can't talk.
And that's why
when you go to the expose DesNet Facebook, there's or thread. One of the points that they point out, one of the other guys that they basically doxed, is that, well, he's very anti-communist, as he was saying, Marxism, communism. That's their key point for one of them. He's very anti-communist. Like that's a very big sin. That you're racist everything, but you're anti-communist also. That's a very big Antifa thing, and that's something that's Quako's presentation. As you can see, well, you mentioned Jacob Hansen and every single other defender of the church who is in YouTube Online, English speaking, they rely on his words regarding DesNet. That's something that I don't like. Is you go Jacob Hansen, even Cardon, everything they mentioned the same thing that he told them. He's the one who's saying the same things that the Salt Lake Tribune is saying. That's a problem. If you're with the same message as the Salt Lake Tribune, who the Salt Lake Tribune has been founded to be against the church and stuff like that, there's a problem right there. And
he's their propagandist.
Yeah. And as Leiland was saying regarding the messages of just being focused on one topic, it's also the same of as I was saying, just in a team or a group, you have the musician, you have the writer, you have everything. You have to know different mediums, but not everyone. If you know something, but you don't have the skill of the other ones, you have to outsource and reach out. That's something that it's within business. It's very, very varied, very lots of people and stuff like that. And then there's a presenter of Quaker. No, everyone's like every single one is evil. Every single one is not against racism. Everyone's an antichrist, everything like that.
Kills by association type stuff.
Yeah. And he does that with everything. Even his last Twitter post was saying, "Oh no, there's this abusive bishops that they just feel, but they're gonna paint the whole church wrong." Like he posted that right after doing everything to this, not stuff like that. He doesn't see it. And then his threads, it's everything, all the chaos he caused, that he gets to be called Etmo, is that what was Leiland saying is the focusing on the esoteric, but rejecting the prophets and moving them down and putting them up top. As you can see, the theosophy, her name is prophetess. That's what something that Quaker always says. And he's also looking for a replacement for the prophets. He's saying there's always a voice in the wilderness. They're looking for that. He's also trying. It's out the ascended master. He's trying the ascended master. That's what his main focus is. But I think he's trying to be one himself. So, and he always presented in his tweets as they're going against my image of what I'm telling the truth. I think he's trying to be that guy. Because when I was speaking to him, he was saying that when he was born in a cult, but not in a cult, but he wasn't a member of the church, and he doesn't know where he was when he was born, so he doesn't really know his age. So I think that's more of he's focusing on he has possibly this origin, and it has to be him. And so he's trying to read everything as possible to try and become the smart one, while just focusing on stuff. And as I showed you that thread he had posted, he gets close to the items. He mentions even vocabulary of Venoms, the 5 horns of Venus, everything. But then he just switches it to, that's why we are not to focus on the prophets and this other stuff, because he only sees the imagery, but he doesn't really see the real origin of the stuff.
How it connects.
Look, he presents it But then he twists it to be focused on do not follow the prophets because Washington, who was baptized in and done his works, but they are all wrong. That's actually the real battle that's what's going on with him. And look, the apostles, they say that he also one man that his works were being done, so he is highlighted as good, but in the sense of his works being done. But he was like, no, they're all wrong. They were all always wrong. That's something that he's focusing on. Replace this and everything. And he presents the items, as Leiland was saying, is as the cosmic. There's always something cosmic. There's always a planetary item, and then the mythology. In the quickest thread, he presents portions of mythology, and he does mention planetary stuff, but it's just that there's no real connection to items. And I think that got me interested too. What Leiland presents is that in my heritage, there's lots of even planetary portions, but even written in record in the Popol Vuh itself is the seeing of the cosmic events they saw. Yeah, the book of them. It's the only record written of that. So
Mayans.
The other some people don't really trust the word by mouth by other mythologies on the other tribes because
Oral
it's not really written down. Yeah, it can be modified, saying contaminated with Christology or other stuff. But the Popol Vuh was the only one written down, and in it, it's found that many records, jars, writings, inscriptions of being 600 years before Christ. But it has, as Leiland says, the very repetition of the same thing. And even in it mentions the coming of seeing of the great signs, great lights in the sky that changes the burning of the whole earth. Even the people who know lots of stars, planets, they very fine records that you can see in their walls of the moving planets and stuff. They mentioned that the sun wasn't there. There's other lights and stuff. And then you go to the esoteric worlds and everything. They go with Saturn. Saturn is the devil. Saturn is evil. These gods, they're Saturnian, but that's all they focus on. And then there's in the Popol Vuh itself, the word of one of the gods, Tohil, the Greek god of fire, and his legacy. His form is very interesting description in his very building of his pyramid, the Kaaba. It's also called the same as the Kaaba of the Muslims. The same again, a black box Saturn planet.
Or the New Jerusalem, the square building coming out of the sky. Same ideas. That if you can see the
evil,
forms,
it's satanic. Yeah. But it's written there. It began with a people who, once they began worshiping him, they became savages and they began stealing people of the other tribes that were successful in the cities. But that's because the small ones that the Popol was based about began worshiping Tohil and stuff. So that's all they focus on, is that it's evil, but they don't really see the same narrative told in every single mythology, which it's what theosophy is actually noticed a little bit is, there's this connection here. You can see it here. You can see this other place but just focus on the symbolism. It's just evil and just these reincarnated beings and the ascended masters but then not the actual connection of they don't really see the connection of it all. And that's what the Quaker saying is like, look at this portion. He gets close to it, but then he diverts it very directly to but do not follow the prophets. Do not listen to, put it down, put this other stuff up, but just as in this narrative. So that's something that I don't like. Is he does even to death nothing. He twists it, and everything was because everyone was pushing back against him. It was like, okay, I was just focusing on the slavery portion. What slavery portion? That was just a small, minute thing. But he tried to push everything back because everyone was pushing against him, and because of that, he's saying, "Oh no, everyone's against, everyone's evil," and others that he was labeling as this, that who were not, that were pushing against him. He labeling, "Oh, you're this and you're this," and putting above that's basically the way I present that Leiland is. He's really good at speaking, that really can speak, but that's the thing that's going on. That's the main focus of the contention that's being caused on purpose just for attention.
Right.
But that's
let me recap kind of what you're saying there, Guatemax.
Mm-hmm.
Let me recap just to see if I'm understanding everything too, because that's exactly how I see this, is that you have, and I'm not going to name him, and I'm not trying to single out anybody. I'm not trying to offend him, honestly. Like, he has me blocked. I've never really interacted with him. I've never had a conversation because I'm flat out blocked. So it's not like he's asking and we're having this debate about like what we believe. I've never been able to talk to the guy. And then in turn, he'll just come and trash me and all my friends. And he'll say, no, they're this and that. They're white supremacists or that. And he'll gladly participate in the doxing of people, of anonymous people of his own faith, right? For this very attention. And that's what has turned a lot of people on my side and my friends that have been out here defending the church faithfully online against ex-Mormons and people who are just outright lying and stuff. And here we're getting it from our own people. And it's the worst when these people have influence. They have influence. They have cool like ideas, but they're totally going off the rails, like Guatemax is saying, in terms of looking at one isolated thing and then making wild assumptions and never tying it back to the temple or the prophets, but always inserting this doubt of Brigham Young was wrong and this and that and blah, 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 and always wanting to talk about these points without seeing them from this big macro cycle perspective. If you get lost of that eternal perspective and you get detached from it, you don't have an anchor back to it. You're not secured to the plumb line of the Lord, the gospel, and seeing everything through that perspective. Well, then you're going to be easily deceived, even the very elect in these last days, because of this unified information age that's coming together, because everything will be easy to see. And that's why I believe a lot of the Protestant Christians and the Catholics are going to have a huge crisis of faith, because the foundational things, the Nicene Creed and all these things are based on, are going to be displayed fundamentally and without refute to be false. And the only philosophies that are going to have a means to bring the metaphysical and the physical together as this starts to unfold is what? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because of what we do in the temple, because of how we believe the temple is the unification of the spiritual and the like all three worlds, the celestial, the spirit world, and the living world. That's exactly what all ancient temples were, going back to the Mayan temples, to the Egyptian temples, to all of these things. It was this center place and location, the world mountain, that imitated an ancient order that Earth was in previously. So let me, with that kind of transition, let me get into this, because I agree. And I'm just as frustrated with people within the church that refuse to look at these things objectively and want to play the emotional politicking game. That's what I see happening with the Midnight Mormon stuff. Yeah, exactly. You make politics your religion because you don't see the macro street. You're not a seer. You're not seeing exactly anything what's going on. That's why your testimony fails.
Me and Chris have been I've been pointing that out to Chris. It's like, seems like there's so many out there who want their politics to inform their religion rather than the other way around.
And it's so easy to do it the right way if you just believe the scriptures, believe what the prophets have said about a Babylon versus Zion, that this is the reality of it. And yeah, right now it's primarily spiritual in terms of how it's being played out. That Antichrist is primarily ideological at the moment, right? But do not be deceived that that's all it is, because they are working behind the scenes. That's why it's a mystery Babylon, because they're doing it behind the scenes to do a big rug pull right here at the end, where there will be somebody who comes on the scene to say Christ is not the Christ because of this, because of these things in history that they've kept from you, because of these things that they've intentionally withheld for you. And they're going to point to religious institutions as being the cause of this deception. And it will convince so many. We're going to have a mass exodus from the Christian faith due to these things coming to the surface. That's what theosophy, that's what the secret conspiracy through the CFR and all of this one world government stuff, their designs are this. They're to subvert the Christian and all faiths. In fact, the Muslim and Christian faith, they wanted us to fight each other. And
if you see the very last time I was on the Midnight Mormons and they were talking to me and we were asking about this stuff, like, how do we resolve this? And but one of the things I asked them is like, well, we just got to follow Christ. The whole thing's about falling down on Christ. I'm like, yeah, but what if they take over Christ and you're following that thing that they take over and announce that it's that this image way now and always should have been this way and that sort of thing. And Quaker even stopped and said, wow, you got me thinking here, when I said that. But who knows if I kept going with it, but that was kind of one of the deals of like poking at Jim Bennett or a lot of these progmos or different people that we've talked about, is that we do feel that there is we know there is an attempt to take over and wear like a skin puppet. The thing that they know that works, the thing that they know that unifies people, like these religious institutions, these things that had and unified and caused a blooming in the desert of like a whole civilization of people. That's what worked. We need to go take that over. And if we take that over and wear that like a skin suit, then people will follow us. And it's one of the things we've just been pointing at for a while. Just like they're trying to take your concepts over from you and sell them back to you under a political horse crap, which we watched happen. We've watched happen in any sort of IP, or you see it happen to Disney, you see it happen to cartoons, you see it happen to video games, you see it, but they say none of this is good enough. We got to go get the one that really holds the power in the minds of the people, which is the religions. And if we go bust in and one of the things Kevin and I look at and point at is we feel like there's those people busting in trying to do exactly what you're saying, use this exact stuff to
there's a bunch of entryists.
Well,
yeah.
And look, we talk openly about this. If you read the works of Ezra Taft Benson or Skousen or any of these guys who address this openly and were ridiculed by everybody in the church for it,
I suggested the supposed ex-Mormon, I suggested the Midnight Mormons we should talk about how Ezra Taft Benson was right.
Yeah.
And I've taken crap for that sort of stuff, but they always kind of hedge off of it. Like, no, well, we don't want to talk about it. I'm like, yeah. People say, where's the prophets? Where are the prophets? And Kevin knows this. I've had a long time thing of saying Ezra Taft Benson. Like, you can't argue with it. And ex-Mormons will look at me and they'll start arguing. Like, he brought about all those sorts of crazy. Nope. I listened to this guy, Harris. He wrote a whole entire book. I read the whole entire book. He's this professor out of Colorado who wrote a book that says he had special access to the stuff. I listened to the whole book, and sorry, Ezra Taft Benson was right. That's even your own book. And it was so many years. Like, I got sideswiped by this. Kevin was talking to me, like I said before. Kevin was talking to me about this stuff before. I'm like, Kevin, how did you see it? How did you know before? How did you know? I found out about it kind of like the hard hit you over the head way, because I went and got exposed to it in schools, and they I've said to people, like, my major religious falling out in my lifetime was an academic one. That's the thing. Like, I came in there, I went into that one and found out that all those guys were pushing this crap on me. And so, like, I found about it this way. And then, oh, wait a minute, Ezra Taft Benson was talking about it exactly right 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, what? Yeah. Anyway.
This is a perfect segue too. I'll speak to what I have up on the screen, but then let's move into that. Let's go, because I have a hard stop at 9. I got to actually go clean the church, or 10 o'clock your time.
That's good. See, and that's one of the things is there's community of people working, and ex-Mormons sneer at it, and it's a type of linking and linkage that we're never going to get and understand as ex-Mormons. It's just it's not happening. We're not catching up. That the fact that you're going to go work towards community. Instead of sit online and yell at people, it's just everything constantly kind of rolls back to they're doing it right and we're doing it wrong. And I hate to tell you that, ex-Mormons.
Well, I just want to contrast your experience. I think it's cool that you went into academia and fell out and then came back, and you can look back in hindsight and see how you were deceived by professors and just the institution of certification bias, right?
Well, it's been a process, and part of the coming back is, like, I'm very cautious of myself of just wanting to do that politically. Like, and Kevin knows about it. Kevin and I have talked a lot about it. Like, I want to politically align with people who are like this, and then there's some stuff where I'm worried that some people in the church are already overtaking that sort of stuff. But also, I don't want to be the one to be the political entryist. It's got to be real. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. And we'll go after I talk about this. Ezra Taft Benson was talking about the same things that ancient Ezra and the Apocrypha is bringing up with Ezra's Eagle about politics and what's going on today. So again, it's just a coincidence. Well, I'm sorry, my friends and anybody listening, I do not believe in coincidences whatsoever. I believe that there's a synchronicity of history, that all things are connected and interconnected, and there is no way to separate them, and that things happen in history because men take action, that there's agency at play, and it's not always just like, oh wow, they decided to attack these people and take their resources and now the whole world's changing. It's like, come on, like, this has been in play and in plan for hundreds of years, and that's how it's always been. If anybody who studies history knows that wars are ritual, right? Wars are not like spontaneous, I'm mad and here we go, but that there's calculation and conspiring and lots of stuff that goes in behind the scenes, like years before things actually happen. So, like, all that in mind, we forget that in our presentism, in our comfort of instant gratification and reality. But Ezra Taft Benson was talking about the same things that Ezra of the Old Testament, the Apocrypha, King James Apocrypha, that Joseph Smith would have had, by the way, when he's translating and doing the New Testament and everything. He had the Apocrypha with him. It wasn't until the early 1900s, late 1800s, that the general Christian world shed the apocryphal texts from the Bible and made them kind of separate. They were all one, like, through the restoration. And so anybody who's like, I'll read the Apocrypha because I stick to the canon and I only want to hear what the prophets say, I'm like, you're missing out on a lot of what the prophets have said. And the prophets have said that you'll take benefit by reading that with the Holy Ghost. And they point specifically to the chapters in Ezra's Eagle as certain things that you should study. So this, again, it's not me being, I want to be esoteric, bro, catching on some trend that nobody else is on, but looking at saying, wow, this was here the whole time. here it is. But now we can understand it. And only now, in fact, only since Donald Trump took the presidency have we been able to decipher this prophecy, to see and place it in its proper context. That's amazing. That's a revelation. But you're not going to go and go to ex-Mormons with that, because they don't care. They're not going to take the Apocrypha or Ezra or anybody seriously, because they don't have a testimony of Christ.
Kevin's talked to me a whole ton about it, but I'm a bit of a different breed.
Yeah. You've got a live stump, man. It's growing, and you're good. You're not out in disconnected from the wind here. All right, let me get this off the screen though. This is in my essay. I don't know if it's number 4 or something on my Eternal Perspective Substack. Also on my YouTube playlist of the same thing. This is me laying a ladder out and my framework. So anybody who wants to know, like, how do you see the world and how do you understand these things the way you do? These things that we're talking about. My podcast that I have got 10 episodes, and caution to the wind, they're like 3 hours each, like two hours each. They're long, but it's because I am doing the work and sourcing, like providing the sauce for all of these things. Oh, why do you believe that, Leiland? Because this, and this, and here's why. And here's multiple witnesses from multiple prophets for why I do this. And this is the framework that I've always seen things through. Going back to your quest through academia and the brainwashing, when I came back from my mission, I already had this kind of mindset that I'm explaining to you now. This unify everything and bring it all to a gospel perspective. So I went into academia knowing that, like on guard. And so as they're, and my degree, the things I was studying. Yes.
I mean, it should be. I mean, the fact that even just the general church, if you could say to them, like, do not be sending your kids there without major understanding that they got to be on guard.
And that's what got me through. In fact, I loved college in that regard, because I could see, like, hey, they're wrong right here. Like, they're talking about reincarnation here. I know it's wrong, and here's this and that, and like, and it made me do the work and study things out while I was like, I did as much spiritual study during my college years as I did academic study. Like, and my dad actually told me that when I came back from my mission. He's like, if you remember one thing from me, Leiland, do this: study for school, or study the scriptures and the gospel as much as you study for school. I was like, that's impossible. Like, you got to study 8 hours a day with like some of the degrees I was doing. I was going to go into law school. I was like, there's no way. But as I strived to do that and had that kind of mindset present as I was going through my academic career, it transformed how I see the world. And I am grateful for the degree that I got, even though it's worthless. Like, it's a humanities dumb degree about integrating different studies. Go for it.
No, I say it's worthless. Yeah. I joke with people all the time. There's this Simpsons quote of this kicker, like, breaks his leg. He was a football player. He's like, well, he was going to have a career in football, but now he has this degree in humanities. Oh no. I kind of joke. I frequently joke about that. It's useless.
But to rebut my own statement there, I have grown to love what I studied, because I realize now that it has played a critical role in all these things I'm talking to you about now. Because
that would be nice, because all I studied was crap that you got to watch out for.
Yes.
And so I'm just an expert in crap you got to watch out for, which is no knowledge at all. Yeah,
No, because you're going to provide a ladder for people that have similar connections to what you've experienced, right? You know how to get out of that hole. And so you've got to, like, these podcasts, I believe you're doing that. I think that's part of you sharing the gospel. You're living it, and you're reaping benefits and blessings because you put this effort up, you and Kevan. I promise. Like, I know that. But it's because of your shared experience that you have this specific part in the orchestra to play. Mine has to do with a lot of these weird esoteric things, because I studied that stuff. Like, my degree was, again, choose your own adventure, where I got to pick kind of what I was studying. My main focuses were history, especially the conquests of Mexico. So again, I studied Hernan Cortez and all of his conquests in the early 1500s, all those things. I have all the journals and diaries. It was awesome. So I studied that, like, extensively. And then on top of that, I studied astrophysics, especially black holes and these kind of things. This was before I knew of alternative ideas. So I was classically trained in these things through college, learning about some of these ideas, and then broke away and saw that there were alternative explanations that college didn't want to tell me about, that college didn't want to explain or even acknowledge existed. And when I jumped out of that and looked at these things and applied them to the issues and challenges that they were saying, we still have these challenges today. I was like, really? I thought we understood that. Well, really? We don't know this? And that's what they tell you in these higher level physics classes and things like, yeah, we know how things work enough to make products that everybody loves and have the amenities and the things that we do now, but we still don't understand these things fundamentally, like certain things like gravity, for example. They don't understand gravity. Like, fundamentally, they still don't understand it. And so that's those kind of revelations to have in college, but with this eternal perspective mindset, bringing everything back to the restored gospel and what Joseph Smith said, was an awesome experience. In fact, again, it fomented and formed all of these things that I present now in my podcast, my music, my poetry. My poetry is rife with all of these things that I've learned and taught. That was my impetus, again, for getting on Twitter and wanting to share these things, is because I have provided a means of brainwashing mind control through music, right?
I
But that
really
could
like
then
that
could things.
idea. I liked your idea because so much of ex-Mormonism is like, whoa, watch out for the mind control things you're doing. And then you're saying, no, lean into the
Lean
mind
into it.
control
Yeah,
to
lean into it.
yourself.
Because if you're not
there's
doing
a-
it yourself, they're doing it for you. And
there's
they'll
somebody,
say
like,
they
I
aren't.
can like link it to like the idea of like bodybuilding. I get into bodybuilding and stuff, and it's like the way you do it is that, but then you're bringing it to this like realm of spirituality and just being a good person with good thoughts. Like you need mind control to control your thoughts.
Yep.
But don't get like so hung up in like that word mind control. They're trying. No, you lean into it because you want your thoughts a certain way. You want them.
Well, it's that whole Thomas Sowell thing, it's all going to be trade-offs. It's like, if you're not going to lean into it, somebody else is going to do it for you.
Yeah.
But see,
Somewhere
that's also
else.
what happened with Jim when he didn't know who I was, but he recognized my name, but he didn't know I was a woman. He just took in what was told to him. He has his own narrative, like Jim Bennett,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
when he was told, and that's he's very evil and stuff, and he only focused on Destiny stuff with me, and
that's not you at all.
Like, he knew, yeah, he when he discovered, I was a woman. I always had my profile picture as a woman myself. Every single other anti-mos and in Twitter and ex-mos, they know I'm a woman. And why didn't he know? He always had me blocked, but how does he recognize my name and stuff? But it's just fed onto him, and he just blurts it out.
And that's
narrative stated. Just
it's one of the things
not actually seeing.
Kevin and I have like talked about a whole lot, because you have Quaker who will demonize you, but then the other people out of risk aversion will just kind of go along with it. And we frequently point out that risk aversion doesn't act very differently than the actual wokeness itself,
Yeah, it's the other side of the coin.
Yeah, and recognizing that quite cool. Like even in the last stream where I was speaking with Jim, when he spoke up, I recognized his lies. It's something like he thinks, no one's gonna lose, because he deleted his whole Twitter, but he sided with Jim, like, this not went after me. Also, but it's because of cringe, but he doesn't say why. And yeah, it's something that is just a nerd. He has to maintain something, but he has to. He knowingly does lie about it. It's something that that's something very sad, but it's something that he feeds onto the public. The others, the vendors of the church, they go by his narrative again, but then really go by Nessa, because there's a blacklist and everything. They just hear what he says, like Jim was doing, just saying here, and they trust him, but he's not trustable in that portion.
I mean, what I love about this conversation, I think it's and what you're kind of pointing at, Leiland, is it's what I've always noticed about God and kind of like the eternal. I don't know, just let's call it the eternal reality or whatever, is that there's, and things down here, everything seems so inverted and upside down. So it's like, I remember going through the 90s, you have all these, all the lefties were always talking about having an open mind and stuff like that. And I'm like, man, this is probably one of the most open-minded conversations that I've heard. But we kind of start with the premise of you have to have it. It has to be controlled. And I think that's what, like, let's say, I've thought about a lot about freedom and things like that. And to me, true freedom is subjected to, you have to have rules. It's like, if you could consider getting into a metal box with wheels and kicking it up to 80 miles an hour and driving for 13 hours down to, you can get down to the beach, and we can have a relatively high confidence level that we'll be able to make it back in 1 week. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, but all those factors are you have to play by the rules. You have to obey the speed limit. You can't just get on the other side of the freeway and think, I decided that I identify as someone who drives on the left-hand side of the road, and the thing is you're not free if you're dead. So it's like, you start with this, and, I can already feel like this podcast episode right here, or this live stream or whatever, it's probably there's going to be some ruffled feathers.
Oh, good. Honestly, I invite it. And look,
and
talk about risk
I dig
aversion.
it, you
I
know.
don't care.
I love the danger of it, though. You know, I've always kind of been attracted to that, and it's and it's not really dangerous, but why is it dangerous? It's like
because we're all in on this. This is
right,
this is how I see it.
exactly.
Because we, like you said, from the premise at the beginning of this, we're saying buy into what Joseph Smith did. Take it as a truth that you've heard. You've got the witness from reading the Book of Mormon and doing your own work and stuff. Now actually believe that. Actually believe what he said and look at the rest of the world from that paradigm, from that mountain. Because everyone wants to go find some other mountain instead of going to the temple that's there. And what do you think? What is President Nelson doing during this time where we're like, oh, what are the prophets doing? Why aren't they talking about the communists overtaking and blah, blah, blah? And you have right wing just as mad as left wing right now because they're not seeing seers. They're not seeing the mountain. And what is President Nelson pointing to? The mountain. He's been saying, get to the temple, go to the temple, go to your foundations, let him prevail, let God prevail. If you're doing that, you will be taken by the Spirit to study the words of the prophets. You'll find Ezra Taft Benson eventually. You'll find what he said about communism. You'll find what Joseph Smith said about, integrating all these cultures and myths and finding a unified tradition. It's all there. We just don't use it. We want somebody to tell us, this is where it is. This is what it is.
It's like, no, this stuff has already been said.
Yes. And
it's already been said, like it doesn't need to be rehashed just because now we're in a different time. And we have those sayings. We just have to go back and look at them.
And that's why you say,
and not get caught up in the, historicism and all the things that people want to bring up that are, make you want to cast the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. And that's my risk aversion. You talk about why am I not scared? Bring it on. I don't care if people get offended by this, because again, I know where the sourcing is for everything I'm saying. I know that prophets are talking about this and believe this, and that it's in the scriptures, and that when you see the prophetic vision, that it all makes sense and falls into place. But if you want to take sections out and look at them individually without the context, without a tie back to the temple and to Christ and to what he's doing right now before the end of times, right, then you're never going to see it. You're always going to be wishfully thinking of something else that's not the plan of God. Going back to the question on mind control, talking about, be careful, the LDS will brainwash you. I came out of the brainwashing, blah, blah, blah. No, guess what? It is giving your will to God, exactly what Jesus Christ did. That's what mind control is. It is the willful submission of your actions to laws, to being subject, like you said, to rules. You can't have order and organization and ordinances without rules and laws. And we came from the celestial kingdom where those were there. So that's why we feel guilt and awkward when we're down here in this fallen state and we're not living the laws that we know we came from. Like, that's the inherent draw. And that's what looking things through this perspective starts to bring you back to all of that and see everything that it's connected.
Yeah, I think it's super. Kevan and I had a discussion, maybe one of the ones that kind of spread around more than any others, about agency and that sort of stuff. And we were, something came up. I can't remember. It was some news item of the week, and everybody's questioning what agency was. And Kevan explained to me the concept of the agency to choose to give up that agency, if that makes sense. So like ex-Mormons are so into like the consent, and Evan, you got to be consent. But I like your framing of it. It's like, there is consent, there is agency in me choosing to mind control myself into making sure that I'm following the agency of Christ and not my own agency type stuff. Like, so there was that level behind it of, yes, I choose this to mind control myself into the thing, and it's pretty interesting. I really like the
well, it's that whole thing, like Jocko Willink talks about, is that discipline is freedom.
Yes,
that's where that is where you become free, is when you're able to discipline. I mean, look at an active, healthy lifestyle. Look at Chris, and doing, and that kind of thing. And if living healthy, it affords you to be able to have a higher quality of life. You are more free in so many ways if you're able to discipline yourself and actually eat healthy and work out and do those kind of things.
But the thing is, sorry, one of the things I'm saying, like from the ex-Mormon point, I was just telling people, like, they get to this oikophobia, like they hate the self, they hate what we grew up in, and so much of what I've been just trying to yell at them to do is like, stop and look around. Everything that's built around us, everything that we are, everything I am, all this stuff, it does link back to the Mormon roots and the LDS upbringing and all these sorts of things. And stop hating it. Stop listening. Like, when you go listen to stuff, stop being ready to say, I'm not going to follow any of this. What I'm saying is, like, every single ounce of it, like, you guys have all this language, and the language is different than the academic language to describe stuff. But then strangely enough, it always appears to me that you guys are right, that it hits stuff on the head. It circles all back to being correct. And it was always there. And we didn't have to go down all these other routes of finding out the hard way type stuff. And I find out the hard way that you need to, we'll talk about like pornography. Kevin's been somebody who's always been, I'm not that, people who want to normalize and say that's cool and that's fine, all that sort of stuff. No. And I've been there where people have sat there and tried to tell Kevan to his face, like, like, let it go. He's like, no, I'm not dropping that one. I'm going to go ahead and say that one's, that's not cool. And it's messes with your mind. You can tell me all the reasons in the world why, it's okay. I'll chill out on it. But it's your mind. It's about disciplining. Like, you should be on top of that, or never let the thing. And I've seen people argue with him about it. And the thing is, like, across the years, once again, I realize, lately, that everything he's saying is right. Like, it's right. It's right. You should you should stay away from that stuff and not let that stuff get into your world, because you should mind control yourself to not, you should choose to mind control yourself to not fall into that stuff. Anyway, roundabout stuff is what I'm saying is, ex-Mormons, there's so much to look back at and love about what you became or were raised to be morally. I mean, we've talked about how morals become a complete problem as soon as people drop all sorts of stuff. But then if you look back, you find out, like, oh my gosh, there really was this whole tradition here that I'm just kicking down. I'm kicking something down that really helped create what I am, and I'm being stupid, being unaware of it. And
well, they're so worried about deconstruction, they forget about the construction of something that's been so great, so pragmatic, so practical in their lives. It's like, and uncanny
that it was. I mean, well, you guys say 100%. It's not uncanny. It was the spirit. It was
revelation.
God. It was revelation. But from the ex-Mormon world, I say go look at it and just use that word uncanny. It's uncanny. And maybe after a while you'll stop and go, okay, Ezra Taft Benson was revealing or was a prophet. Like, I'll use their language. I concede.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
This conversation just brought up, and immediately to my mind, this is a video that actually ex-Mormons will pass around on Reddit as like a dunk,
sweeter.
right? To say, like, look, he's saying you don't have moral agency, they're brainwashing you. But he's talking exactly to this concept that we're bringing up here, that you choose to give your will. So there really isn't free agency, because as soon as you give up or you have moral agency to choose, but as soon as you choose to follow Christ, as soon as you take his name upon you through baptism and covenants and ordinances, right, then you no longer have free will. You've committed to live Christ's life, to live after his principles, his ordinances, his thoughts, right? That's the whole idea. And that's why he can say, bring every thought unto me, because he's saying these are the conditions for my forgiveness and my being able to exalt you with me before the Father at the final judgment. So with this futurity in mind, that we know and expect and live our lives according to a final judgment that will be levied against us for our actions and our thoughts, right? Why not have the prophets and all of Christ's message be about controlling those, your actions and your thoughts, and your actions, your habits, your character, all of those things stem from your thoughts, and your thoughts are a product of what you have in your heart and your mind putting out basically your presentation of consciousness, right? That's revelation. That's how you receive downloads too, is when your heart and your mind make these connections that they're from God. It's something beyond you. And you receive these downloads of revelation, of information. It's the same concept. So to willingly put yourself and walk in that environment, that is free agency. That is moral agency. Because if you take absolutes like we do, that there is absolute truth, there are absolute laws. And if you want to live at the absolute highest of the absolute truth, then you have to live absolute laws. Like there's no getting around it. And the logic is sound. But rejecting those foundations, well, yeah, you can pick apart logic all you want, especially if you separate it from that whole context. I'm not going to play it, but this is a good video because he basically says that same thing. He just scrubbing through. He's like, you don't really have free agency because you covenant to do what God said.
We covered, is that?
Yeah, Kevin and I had a whole episode talking about it where we discussed it, and we were, of course, like you said, some ex-Mormons. I can't remember the exact. It came up again because it wasn't right when it happened, but it came up again, and people were sneering at. Oh, they say there's no such thing as agency, and Kevin and I reviewed the concept of agency and what it was actually meant by that. But one of the things that to me is amazing about the LDS tradition I was brought up in is agency and how important that's become, and how much of a concept in even in like atheism and them talking about predeterminism and free will and all that sorts of stuff. But beyond that, the communism and all that, like, wow, the tradition I was brought up in, we really, I could even just show you some clips. Like, I couldn't show it because it was in a private conversation, but it was some ex-Mormons saying, like, I had no idea that our concept of agency was going to be what was up for grabs. Like, we left this thing like, hey, we're going into the smart world where everybody's smart now. And then we see all that I saw some people say, hey, I didn't know agency was on the table to be thrown out with the baby at the bathwater with that religion. And they're just like shocked, like, wait a minute, was that really being held up by that old thing, that old mind control system? That old mind control system was what was holding up agency, because we go out of it, we're free, and they go free into the world, and then those people are I can't say the best, they're crapping on agency, they're destroying, and it's uncanny. Or
that was the whole.
You saw them
Feel
saying,
real
I didn't know
in
agency
Japan.
was on the table. We thought we were going into the free world. Turns out agency's on the table to be thrown out in the free world.
Totally.
And the guy arguing for mind control over here is the one
explaining agency.
Yeah.
Well, and look, and I see it how it is. Like, I know, because I listened to a lot of hip hop growing up, that I was being mind controlled, that I didn't know and actually listen to the lyrics, but they were cementing themselves in me. And so this is where my passion in music and stuff started, was like at an early age, recognizing that I was being subverted by things. And also coming from a family that's a bit manipulative. Like, my dad is very a manipulator, like master manipulator, and not a righteous man at certain points. Like, it was a stark example to me of what not to do in terms of abusing dominion and things like that. So, like, me having the ability and the experience with these things at an early age has really crafted like how it's evolved for me now. So yeah, to me, it's like a no-brainer. I'm like, duh, like, you control your own mind. You're an idiot if you're not. Like, if you think that mind control is some exterior thing, you're mind controlled. You have been mind controlled if you think you're not subject to it. That's why I say, okay, I accept that we're all being influenced and persuaded constantly. That's what it is. Persuasion to act, to use your agency. How will I use my agency today? So as soon as you break everything down to that fundamental concept, right, then it becomes easy. It becomes actually fun. It becomes exciting, a joy to insert these little steps that are all there. The prophets have said forever, like you said, this brainwashing tool that Joseph Smith instituted again, but Jesus Christ was the one that's always instituted it, right? He's the one that throughout time has given people, his covenant people, this plan to say, you want to come up and elevate yourself in consciousness like me? You want that Christ consciousness, the ascended master, like whatever it is, like, you want that? You have to do and think like I do. And so here's a pattern and a structure and tools for you to control your mind. And we have that with the structure of the church. Think of the word religion in itself. Adam falls and Satan comes and tempts him and says, oh, you want religion. Why? Well, because religion means literally to tie yourself back to the laws or the orders or God or a divine, or whatever setting that you fell from. Religio, like to retie, rebind, like the ligaments in your bones comes from the same concept, right? That's what religion is. It's to mind control you, to control and frame and provide a pattern like spirographs or whatever, so that you can pattern your template, your tabula rasa, right? You can now encode it and program it yourself. Think about television. And you want to talk about the bigger picture and how I see things. Look, post World War II, this communist invasion and subversion went underground. The Cold War or whatever, it's true, it happened. Ezra Taft Benson wasn't out of touch. He was perfectly on par to say, hey, they went underground. All they did was change their names. All they did was change their faces. All they did was subvert new organizations and newer things. So even the John Birch Society at that time was being subverted actively. Like, it did. It got subverted. Even the ones today, like, you want to talk about America First or MAGA or whatever pops up gets immediately subverted and pulled apart. Same thing happened to DesNat. That's what you see. That's what's the end product result right now of so much confusion in where to find truth is that you have a virus and a cure, and the virus is overtaking the cure as soon as it pops up and comes, and you have this battle going on, and whether you're aware of it or not, like, you're a part of it, you're participating. But post World War II,
that all the time.
You've got the institution of television, and talk about seeing again, wrapping this all into kind of the same concept where we're told to go to Revelation, religion, retie ourselves by seeking that connection to God through the Holy Spirit to guide your life in revelation. So you have the vision. And I'm going to say it again, the same context I continue to use over and over again, the one vision. There is only one vision. There is only one prophecy. There is only one prophetic way to see things. And that is basing it all on Christ and the plan of salvation and how history has been laid out and will be laid out and is known to be laid out and will happen. Like there's no questioning it. And there's no going back, oh, maybe the prophets are wrong. Maybe we're going to get subverted by the devil here in the last days. Yeah, guys, he did all this stuff for 6,000 years and he's going to screw it up right here at the end for you. That's exactly how God works. Give me a break. You're stupid. You don't have any faith. That's how I see it. And that's why I'm going to rub people the wrong way by saying things like this. But at the same time, like I am confident and passionate because I've done the work myself. Like I see it, I know it, I'm experiencing it. I can identify it as it's happening in real time. And then I get called crazy. And then I get called a conspiracy theorist. And then I get called right-wing this or that, or who cares? Like they'll throw every label at me just to dismiss me and not have to go through and dig through the mud to find these gems. But that's what it takes. That's why we're here. It's not supposed to be easy in that we just get everything hand-fed to us. And we think we can have the same glory and sacrifice reward that Christ had, where he came and suffered the entire time. Like how naive of us to think that we're going to have it easy. But I digress. Let me get into this because I do have a hard stop, and I want to kind of wrap this up.
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
even speak to Ezra's Eagle just to maybe introduce it. Maybe if this has gone well, you guys have me come back and we can just kind of more.
No,
more
yeah,
Ezra's
we
Eagle.
keep going because I know it's a subject that's as big as the universe. So
Yes,
we couldn't hit it in 2 hours.
Well, and I want to lay this framework on you, and I've had it up here on the screen. These 12 points, these are mine, and they're arbitrary. So don't take them as these are the only ones. These are the ones that I use personally and have used from my days in college. Like this is not. What I'm presenting with Eternal Perspectives is my life's work. It's like all of my study journals from my life, and I've been a good studier, with the exception of maybe 4 to 5 years in my adult life where I went through a bit of an apostasy, like a relapse, I'll say, from my teenage apostate years. So like I've not always been like 100% balls to the walls. I'm so great and I'm awesome. I'm righteous. No, like I'm with you guys. I'm in the trenches, but my whole life, my gifts, my talents, my poetry, all of it is wrapped in this macro concept of this seeing the big picture, the one vision. That has given me direction because it's the framework, it's the foundation, and all these other unified or unical. That's what Spanish would. These like singular pieces, right? These single pieces that we see, when you grab them, when you encounter them in my life, I'm able to place them properly within this bigger framework because I learned it early. I learned the bigger framework, how it is, and now the blueprints are there, and I can just put in the parts. Here's a couch, here's this, here's that, right? And it goes into my temple. That's the way I see the world, but it's because of these things I'm about to bring up. Because I don't take any philosophy seriously, like theosophy, right? It's got a lot of really good parts, and it's more close to the truth of unifying mythologies and things like that than anything else out there, probably. But it's also the most dangerous because it's like Satan saying, you won't surely die if you eat this fruit, right? They will give you truths, but in an inverted way so that you can easily be persuaded some direction or another. Here are the points. I want to go into them. And these in my essay, I think it's number 4 or 3, one of them, if you get to them. I list these out and I go specifically into each point with scriptures and witnesses and like why I believe this, not just, hey, these are my ideas and why. So I'm going to only name them now, but I encourage anybody who's interested to go and actually, source them and do your own study on them. But God exists, right? And he's a glorified man. This is a concept that you can throw out a lot of reincarnation, metaphysical, general Protestant Christianism, right? That doesn't think God has a body or whatever, he's some immaterial blob or who knows what. Like throw them all out, throw all those ideas out because they will not bring apotheosis to fruition. You will not receive your destiny to become like God and in a body and all the promises that we know through the restoration if your philosophy is teaching that God doesn't have a glorified body. Like and apotheosis is not your destiny. So that one's an easy one and not too cosmic, but it is related. These things you can't separate, like the immortality of man from planets and astrology and all of these things and see them in the proper context. You can't separate them. And that's the problem with philosophy and this disassociation of metaphysics from the physical world that happened 600 BC, moving on forward to now, where it's just all over the place crazy. So
yeah, the
that
oneness,
idea,
they try to change it to the idea of just the oneness instead of embodied God.
Right. And that he's a part of a bigger system. Like that's what we believe. And that's why they're all polytheists. You believe that God is a God and the infinite regression of fathers. Well, yeah, duh. If space is infinite and we have no conception of how big or how expansive or what's it like in that celestial glory or type of reality and state of existence, then there's no way for you to comprehend like where it begins or ends. And if God himself has said that he's eternal, there cannot be a beginning or an end. So a big bang to talk about is just nonsense in this context. That there has been no revelation that there is a start to the regression of gods. So why are we pretending we know the exact date of it? It's so stupid to me. Like from this context, when you look at like Big Bang, like this doesn't work. And if the universe is infinite and eternal, and there are countless scriptures that testify and witness to this. So this is not something that's disputable. Well, there had to be a beginning, blah, blah. No, we don't know. And you won't know until you're have partaken of that celestial glory, what the beginning might be. We sing that in If You Could Hide a Kolob, right? There is no end to these things. There is no end to mercy. There is no end to glory. There is no end to love. We say it over and over again, but do we believe it? Because we'll go and look for a philosophy that tells us a beginning and an end. because we have a beginning and an end in our mortal temporal state. That's the natural man calling out to say, oh, look for a beginning and an end. Okay, so that's a key. When you have people telling you there is a beginning and an end, you can dismiss that part of their philosophy, right? No immaterial matter. This is, again, a distinctly Joseph Smith doctrine, right, that came forward, where you have no separation between the metaphysical and the physical. This is that rebinding of reality, the spiritual and the physical. And then involved in that immaterial matter concept is our conception of the soul being the combination of a spirit body and a physical body, but also that spiritual body that we have now in a previous existence was a base intelligence, like a spirit element, right? And was placed into a spiritual body. That spiritual body was placed into a more denser body that you're in now and had another birth. And you'll have yet another birth into your resurrected body until you have your final form, the third body. This would be like, if you want to talk about Hermeticism, right? Talking about Hermes Trismegistus. What does that word even mean? He was thrice born, thrice deified. In my perspective, in this eternal perspective, in the gospel plan, he's talking about the three estates. You have the first estate, your premortal existence, your second estate, your mortal existence, and your third estate, your resurrected temporal Enoch City living in another elevated lifestyle, your ascended master state, right? Like those are the glories. Or extrapolate it in the cycle within the cycle, you have celestial glory that's also broken into these three divisions, and you have it going on forever. So these are like laws that you can apply and see everywhere. All throughout ancient history, they're talking about the same things too, if you put them in this context. All right, next, light is the ultimate motive force in the cosmos. This is what I harp on the most in my like Twitter threads on the electric universe and things like that. Because right now, the current consensus cosmology, we talked about philosophy being moved from being rooted in the traditions of our fathers to a consensus Hegelian dialectic where they can manipulate the baseline. They can move you from side to side and totally detach you from a foundational reality. That's the same thing that happens in physics, okay? And our current standard model of physics called lambda, I think lambda cold dark matter is what it's called, like officially, the model that they ascribe all cosmology to. It includes the Big Bang, it includes the cosmic radiation background, it includes like all of these theories that they think prove the Big Bang. They fall under this category, but they're foundationally flawed. Why? Because they don't think that light is the ultimate motive force. They claim that gravity is what causes planets and stars and everything to form, gravity. But remember what I said? They don't even understand gravity. So they're attributing the creative force of all things to something they don't understand fundamentally. That even Isaac Newton in his final paper on gravity said, we don't understand it, but we know how it works, kind of thing. Like we can manipulate it, but we don't know what it is or how it acts on bigger scales or anything. Like they can't define it still.
It's with the whole idea of M theory, which we brought up in our last podcast. There's this lady, what was her name, Hofstadter or something like that, and she was pointing out how M theory and the whole ideas of what do you call it, string theory and all that stuff, just they can't get to the bottom of that either, going back to like Edward Witten, and those all talk about gravity versus the other laws of physics, which are, you know, things like the electromagnetic force, the strong force, the weak force. And they just they've spent years and years and years, smartest people in the world on it, and the answer is they just can't get anywhere with it.
And from my perspective, and what Brigham Young would have said too, and I use this quote in my essays too, if you want to read them, like on all this stuff, that he talks about, they'll be blue in the face claiming they know the truth if their foundation is flawed. Like if they start from a bad footing, it doesn't matter what you build in a superstructure on top of your foundation. It's going to fall. It's going to lean. It's going to eventually topple. And that's what Babylon does here in the last days. It's prophesied that all of Babylon, the wise men of the world, they'll be put to shame by the meek people like Leiland, who don't even have a finished degree actually, and are going to school you on the basics of cosmology without like, I don't care if you don't believe me. Like, it doesn't matter. I'm going to present these to you and put the seed in your head, and you can go study them yourself. And eventually you'll come to the same truth. That's how confident I am in these things, that like somebody who's interested and really takes the time to do the work, they're going to come to these same conclusions, that these things need to take priority in our understanding of the universe. This idea, though, that light is the ultimate motive force, it's all through the Doctrine and Covenants. It's all Joseph Smith talked about, that the light of Christ is in and through and creates and animates all things. It's the power by which all the planets and bodies and everything are created, is light. And now in this alternative paradigm that isn't presented to you in college, called the electric universe or plasma cosmology, these ideas are what they're trying to switch. They're trying to change this fundamentally, like on the Gentile front. This isn't even from the church trying to do this. Joseph Smith laid out the doctrine, hey, this is what we believe, that light governs everything, right? But in the secular world, they're still going through a revolution to even address this, that this is true. This is the truth. But I'm telling you, it's a discussion that's been going on for over 100 years. This is what I get into when I talk about the electric universe and plasma and all this stuff being the answer to the questions of astronomy and cosmology and astrology. they're not willing to look at it because they call it pseudoscience or they call it something else, or they'll just dismiss it. Same thing with the DesNat. The same dismissive tactics of the devil are used in this sphere in science and in all, and not just plasma and cosmology like I like to focus on. Think about health science and what we've experienced the last 3 years with COVID and all kinds of stuff, and the disparate opinions and no consensus. There's disorganization because there's been subversion, because there's a foundation that is flawed. All right, I need to go fast because I really do need to hop off.
Yeah,
but I want to
yeah,
get to these 12. Another point that I bring up, and that you have to view all these ideas from Metacism, Gnosticism, Theosophy, all these, is that planets are living beings and have agency. This is a doctrine that we teach. We know the earth wept when Enoch saw it and had his vision. And we know the earth is living a celestial law. You can't be living a celestial law unless you have agency to do that, right? And so planets, and it will be exalted. We have that doctrine in the Doctrine and Covenants, again, section 132 or 130, where it talks about the planet will be celestialized. It'll be resurrected. It'll have a death. It was baptized at the flood. It'll be conferred at the second coming in a baptism of fire. Like, it goes through ordinances as well. The planets do. We have the doctrine that says that this is real. So like, we should be taking astronomy or astrology and these things with the utmost importance. But it's so convoluted today. That's why the prophets have said, hey, stick to the basics, the milk and the honey, and you'll eventually find the truth if you do. Like, that's how I've taken it. That's how I've found these things. Another one, stars are celestial planets. This one, I have plenty of quotes from prophets and things, that the sun is a celestialized world, right? That it's a planet that's gone through a plan of salvation and has received an exaltation or a glory of some type, right? So like, this idea that stars in the common world, the consensus science, they say that stars, when they supernova, they explode and they die and they're never to be seen from again. That's a stupid concept. I thought it was when I first heard it back in the early 2000s. And now with the telescopes that we have and the things we've been watching, they've watched supernovas and the planet's still there. The star is still there after it explodes. And they're like, we don't know what's going on. We don't understand. So they're totally having to change their even understanding of supernovas in astronomy, like consensus astronomy right now. If you don't believe me, look it up. Like, just go and fact check me.
I know that.
Do you get what I'm saying?
That.
Like, yeah. they're constantly having to change what they see because of what they observe with the increase of technology. Because guess what? It doesn't match up with their foundational assumptions and ideas from the beginning.
That's where I'm saying. Size, they revert into like a black hole, right? But
that's what they say. Yeah. And in this paradigm, black holes don't exist. Black holes are actually a concentration of plasma and light. So they're not black, they're not mysterious, they're not gross. We can understand them if we apply plasma physics cosmically. And people are doing that.
They know that it's super dark and has super density, right? So I mean, I guess that's all.
Well, dark is a word they use. Dark is a word they use when they don't know what to describe or how to describe it. It doesn't actually, it's not describing the physical characteristics of it. Just think of it that way. Because the image that they sent back, think of the 2 years ago when they had an image that come out. Oh, we saw our first black hole. It was full of light. It was emitting light. In fact, black holes they see have jets that come out of them emitting stuff. And that's totally contrary to how we learned about black holes in the early 90s and the 2000s, where they said black holes suck everything up and nothing comes out, right? And that's all changed. Now, oh yeah, they shoot things out. In fact, there are like 87 million different types of black holes now that we've seen them. It's like, what? There used to be just one at the center of the universe when it first came out, with that this was the cosmological idea of Big Bang and this is how it works and gravity centered everything. They've just fudged the numbers as new discoveries come in without addressing the foundation. So we're at this like fake superstructure now in 2023 where everything's jumbled and messed up because they refuse to address the foundation. That's where I come from with all of what I'm presenting. And the electric universe, I think, not that they have everything correct, but that they are supplanting and provide the foundational strength that is needed to get us again on the right track to understanding what we're seeing. And I say Joseph Smith 200 years ago, wow, how did he know that? What a lucky guess, right? Like, give me a break. This is revelation, this is prophets, and this is how it's always done. Prophets know these things before the rest of the secular world. Seventh, the earth was formed near a different star or planet. This, again, is part of our doctrine, that the earth was formed near Kolob, near some other star. And this, again, has really turned me off to the Midnight Mormons, in that one of the few videos that I did watch of theirs was about them talking about Kolob, but it was flippant. It was entirely comical. And it was cringe. It was, honestly, it hurt my heart because of the way that I study these things and associate them so closely to the temple and to what Joseph Smith did and to the true history that he's shouting from the world that everybody else just says, poo-poo, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're a space Christian. Oh my gosh, like, wow, you believe in these things? And they want to just totally dismiss it. So to present something on Kolob the way that they did with their video, it was disgusting to me because it does not take into account the serious nature of what is being restored and shown. Because this idea of the earth being formed near a different star or planet, this ties to the ideas of theosophy. This ties to the ideas of ancient mythologies and cultures who used to worship the planets as gods and said that there was a great war in heaven between these planets that separated the state of the paradise that they were in, that they were in this family congregation, a different configuration of heaven. Think of it that
And
way.
you,
A different
and you say
configuration of
the
space.
Popol Vuh kind of pushes at
Yes.
that too, Guatemax?
Yeah,
the-
and now
all-
mythologies are they say the same story, the same characters. People just focus on the characters, but not the actual representations of the actual planet. They say, "Oh, this is like say Saturn. It's the villain. It's satanic." But why Saturn? That's what they don't remember. It's the same story narrative told around the world through the narrative written down, a testimony, a single story, global story.
A unified story. And that's the appeal of the temple to me. That's what Joseph Smith restored, in my opinion, is that he restored the keys to understanding how all these disparate cultures across the world were talking about and drawing and putting images up of the same things all throughout the world. It's because there's this different history of the planet that has been occulted, been hidden from the normal society. So our consensus view of the world is this uniformitarian view. And that's another concept we'll talk about next time when we talk about Ezra's Eagle and maybe go into Velikovsky a bit. Because this idea of uniformitarianism is contrary to what the scriptures witness in catastrophism, that there can be sudden drastic changes to the earth that totally change the face of it in short amount of times. The consensus world doesn't believe that. Yeah, or planetary interaction. That's what the ancients witnessed and testified of. They said that the planets used to come by and interact with the earth by setting it on fire, by shooting lightning bolts at it. That's why Jupiter and Saturn and all these people in all their ancient mythological depictions, they're fighting with thunderbolts because there's electrical interactions between planets as they move between space. Think of the sun like an atom, right? And you've got these electrons flying around it. Well, when they move or it transmutes or it changes into something, they interact and shuffle and they move places. That's what I believe happened after the flood, is that you had a shuffling of the planetary system. That's why Peter in 2 Peter says, before the flood, there was an old heaven and an old earth. But after the flood, there was a new heaven and a new earth held in store until yet another new heaven and a new earth when Christ comes again in glory. That he's talking about the literal space that you see. When you look up in the sky and you see planets and stars and everything move and the poles, everybody on the world today thinks that this has been in place for millions of years, that we've been cruising in the same position forever. They never ask the fundamental question, has it always been this way? Has the earth always been here? And when you get into the astronomy of our solar system, each planet requires a different theory as to why it rotates or is tilted or exists the way that it is. There is not one theory by popular science that can explain all of the planets and how they are. That's how dysfunctional science is today. Yet you have everybody on Twitter who doesn't want to take an effort to look into these things or understand these things, that will just take the word of popular science or astronomy magazine. That, oh, we discovered this new thing. And no, they're just spinning wheels and making crap up to cover their tracks because they're getting caught looking at these things and the observations are directly contradicting their big dogmas. So that's where we're at right now in terms of a scientific revolution. We're at the point of that. So we can all feel the political revolution boiling right now across all nations in the world, especially here in America, where you've got some type of conflict and pull and dialectic being overplayed.
Yeah, it's global.
Think that this is happening in every discipline that you can look at. That's the witness to me that we're at this big universal changing of cycles of times, a fourth turning type idea. So apart from that, that's just all in this idea that Earth was formed near a different star. Now I get real into it. And like Guatemax brought up, the original star that all these ancient civilizations witness and say, they say Saturn was the original sun, the first sun, the good sun, the perfect sun. They call it that. And that it fell away and was lost. And that's the whole dying God thing where Jupiter comes and emasculates this father Saturn and takes his throne. All of these mythologies are literally telling the story of how the heavens changed through planetary history, through human history. I'm not talking hundreds of millions of years. I'm talking within right here, the last 7,000 or 6,000 years from the fall, the temporal existence, because this again is our doctrine. Joseph Smith asked the Lord directly, what is the length of like the temporal history of the earth? We're talking about from the fall until the second coming and after the millennium when the earth dies and is resurrected. He said straight up, there's no disputing it, 7,000 years. So the creative process, you want to say, oh, well, maybe it took longer. I agree. Maybe it did, right? Maybe it was another 7,000 years of extreme plasma events that shaped the initial creation before Adam and Eve were placed on the earth. That could happen. In an electric plasma universe, that's not even like out of the question. That's assumed. Like that's a given. Whereas if you take the common popular model of science that things have to take millions and billions of years to coalesce and form, it causes an issue with pre-Adamites and fossilization and all these other things that can insert doubt into the general story of Genesis, of ancient Sumerian texts, of the Egyptian texts, of all these ancient cultures that were unified in understanding that the planets and space and cosmos and what we are doing here on Earth are all interconnected. That was disassociated from 600 BC until now. And now it's at its worst point ever where we don't even believe that the metaphysical and the physical should be intertwined. America is unique. in that we have so much freedom and everything, but we're also unique in that we're a world power right now that does not integrate religiosity into. In fact, there's this adverse reaction going on, the separation of church and state entirely, right?
Mhm.
Where they think they shouldn't be together, yet all ancient governments and kingdoms integrated them into one, because that's a part of reality. Like, you can't get away from the metaphysical and your politics and morals, right? That's a moral society is only how our constitution works. And you've got to have that metaphysical piece of bringing God into it. All right. I went a little on that we can talk about that later, but I really do have to leave because I promised to clean the church and I don't want to be late.
Yeah, we don't want to hold you up from your duty. So.
Last 4 points. A congregation of planets sharing a common axis. So this one, it takes a bit more anecdotal evidence to accept. And so if this is the one point that a lot of people don't take out of my 12-point list, I don't mind. I don't care. It doesn't matter because the rest of it's still solid. But this idea of a congregation of planets, I'm not sure if you've ever seen Philo Dibble's drawing. Philo Dibble was a bodyguard of Joseph Smith, and he had a...
How do you spell the name? I haven't seen it.
I can pull it up and I'll
okay, you'll pull it.
I'll bring it into here. So Philo Dibble was a bodyguard of Joseph Smith and has some amazing stories and is a huge, like, major part of church history. He's quoted like ad nauseum in terms of different events that, like, he was there during the reception of several revelations that are in the Doctrine and Covenants and stuff. He was present. And so his journal is a huge, like, source and boon for historians, except they'll ignore this. They 100% do not talk about this. And he had this notarized in early 1900s, his son. This was a diagram that was drawn to him by Joseph Smith about the antediluvian situation of the solar system. He said that there were planets stacked in a line, polarly, north and south, and connected by plasma bridges, or they called them narrow necks of land, right? But this same concept is exactly the same as what Thunderbolt's Gentile scientists that are alternative to the mainstream, Thunderbolt's project, polar configuration. Watch, if I just type this in, polar configuration, that's what they call it, polar configuration of planets. If I pull up images on this, they have these same similar, let me find a good one of the three piece. Well, this is kind of showing it. This is, imagine looking north and seeing Mars, Venus, and Saturn in a line from the North Pole. These guys have put this image together based on comparative mythology, putting all the mythologies about Saturn, Mars, Venus, these Passovers, the planetary gods and their wars and the changes happening to Earth's history, and they reconstructed it to a fine degree of detail. Like, you can't make this up what they did and still stay true to all of the different sources they're bringing in. But it works. In fact, all these different cultures across the world on different continents, disparate continents, meaning separated, not connected. There was no way they were communicating to each other unless they were all just seeing the same phenomenon and recording it and talking about it in different ways. That this configuration of planets broke up at the flood. That Saturn is a star, it discharged its atmosphere of hydrogen and baked and covered the Earth in a flood, right? Oxygen-rich planet gets dumped on by hydrogen of a nearby protostar like Saturn, and Saturn goes wrapped. It becomes like a mummy and goes quiet. Think of it as like if it was a star that had a whole bunch of energy and it was radiating a whole bunch of light to help in our creation process. At the flood, it was constricted and put away. And Job laments in Job 26 that now the Lord hangeth the earth from nothing, and he scattereth the stars over the empty place. Job says this. That would have been the moving of this structure of planets in a polar orbit like Philo Dibble shows here, and Joseph Smith witnessed that this is how it used to be and how it will return in the millennium, that you will have a return of a family of planets, a congregation of planets that recombine to make this paradisical state that we're expecting in the millennium. Like, how do you expect the earth to be a paradise without some major heavenly changes?
Did you have you listened to, I think, is it Jody Stoddard's like stuff on, like, she does like the last days timeline, like videos and stuff like that. She did some that were pretty good, I thought. Yeah, but I think she kind of highlighted that, like, because she gets into like the astrological signs and stuff like that. But there was like one part where like all the planets were in line, or like I can't remember exactly. I mean, is that kind of what you're hinting at here?
It's an echo. It's exactly, yeah. It's the same thing, but think of it as a fractal. Like, our current condition, we see the stars and we consider astronomy from our position.
She
could change.
She pointed at it as stars. Like, there, I don't know if she was talking about like the whole, at the beginning of or in Revelation when it's talking about like the
sign of the sky, the woman, and everything.
Yeah. Virgo and the retrograde motion and all that stuff.
That all plays into a part of what I talk about. But in my mind, it would be jumping the gun to jump into conversations like Jody Stoddard has without understanding this foundational, like how this progressed. So to me, I'm like, yeah, that's great. I love that people are drawn in by that. But it's going to be like, you're going to be swimming once you have that information with no way to attach it back to the temple or these other things. If that's all you're getting exposed to is like Jody Stoddard stuff. Because she doesn't necessarily bring up this cosmological element of all these things, like the one story with all of mythology and everything, bringing Saturn into the play. Did you know there are Saturn stones on the Salt Lake City temple as well? In my articles, I've got all of these on there that point to an understanding of these things before it kind of.
Did they keep all that with like renovation and stuff too?
That's the Saturn stones are as late as 1993 in the New Era. There was an article describing the different symbols on and you can look this up in your Gospel Library app, 1993 New Era. I don't know if it was April or I can't remember the month, but if you look it up, symbols on the Salt Lake City temple, the Saturn stones are right there described. And in fact, they're described in that article to the teenagers, which was what the New Era was written for, right? That they were representative, the Saturn stones of Kolob. Okay, so exactly right there, I've got support from all kinds of different, maybe they're one-offs, right? And you don't have prophets talking every day about this stuff, but there's enough evidence to put things together to make sense of it all without going off the rails on some weird tangent that puts the brethren and the prophets in some lower position, because they're not. They've been revealing this stuff forever. We just won't accept it. It's like Joseph Smith said, getting new ideas in the heads of saints is like splitting wood with cornbread as your mallet and a pumpkin as your dodger, like using very breakable things to try and split something hard. Like it doesn't happen. They shatter to pieces. So this congregation idea is important in talking about these other alternative ideas of electric universe and planets and Passovers and stuff like that. This matters if you want to talk about the second coming and the signs of the times and what we should be expecting and waiting for. If it doesn't involve actual moving of planets and the return of planetary idolatry, I don't care about it. Like, I think you're just blowing hot air because of how much scripture and stuff points to these things returning. Another thing, Earth is to be restored to a new configuration of heaven. Again, this is the millennium. I have plenty of scriptures that talk about this, that there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and all of these things will change, and men will live for the life of trees, basically. You know, like there will be no death, will be twinkled in an eye and changed. Well, something physically has to change here in our environment for that kind of thing to happen. And that can happen if all of these things are electrical in nature, and just by moving them, you can change like the transmutation of something. Like alchemy, all these ideas, they're an echo of what happens on the bigger scale in creation, because the second coming of the millennium is just a stage in creation. Like that's what it is. And so if light's the power that brings it to pass, and the motive power and everything that controls everything, well, it would make sense that at the second coming, there's going to be this purification and burning and a changing of the entire face of the land due to these same forces. So that's another idea that gets wrapped into this. If your philosophy isn't talking about a new imminent change to the planetary systems, then it can be thrown out. It's garbage, because that's exactly what all the prophets point to. To go along with this, we believe that planets can move from their orbits or change their behavior. We see this happen all the time in the scriptures, from the Book of Mormon to the Old Testament to the New Testament, where the planets are reacting or acting some form as signs and symbols, but also in obedience. Like you have Joshua's long day where the sun stands still in the sky. Well, we know from the Book of Mormon, it was described that the earth slowed its rotation on the command of God. Like they're obedient. They can do things that modern science would say that they can't do. So to say that the earth is going to change configuration and join into a new congregation of planets at the second coming, or like Isaiah says, the earth will be as a chaste roe and be removed as a cottage from its position, that it will be run out. It will be, it'll wobble to and fro as the sun goes dark and the moon turns red and stars fall from heaven unexpectedly, and there will be a great earthquake. All of these things accompany these planetary catastrophes that have happened before in these previous breakups, and that will return again for the second coming. I'm not creating anything new with this. I'm in fact integrating the old message that we say is fantastical and made up. We say they made up their mythologies just to make sense of the world. No, we are the ignoramus in that equation, if that's what we believe, because they were telling the truth. Last one, Joseph Smith said that the last grand sign before the coming of the Son of Man would be heralded and called a planet or a comet by the world. And this is right in line with all the rest of the things that I go up and over in my essays about why we should believe in these alternative ideas, like Immanuel Velikovsky, who says that the Passovers of the Exodus was a literal close encounter with the planet Venus that came by the earth, and that electrically interacted and caused all the plagues, caused the earthquakes, caused the destructions, caused the fires, caused all these things. And this is why idolatry, planetary idolatry, was such a temptation for the Israelites in the Old Testament. The Phoenicians, the Babylonians, all the people around them, the Sumerians, or the northern tribes, the Syrians, they all had this idea that they were worshiping these planets because they had control over creation. They could come down and airburst Sodom and Gomorrah, an entire city, wipe it off the face of the map if they so capriciously felt so. That's how they interpreted it. But in our context, we understand that God controls these things, that Jesus Christ is the Lord of hosts. Hosts in this cosmic context means planets. Aren't we just like these bacteria on the earth as a host? Like if you think of us that way, I know the communists and the lefts and progressives, they'll say that the humans are a virus, right? On this planet, we're a plague on this earth and our destructive force to it. But that's inverted again to what we are, that we're symbiotic with the planet. Without the planet, we would not have bodies. And without us, the planet could not be exalted. It's the same chicken and egg concept. And it's plainly revealed in section 130 of the Doctrine and Covenants, where it talks about the celestialization of the earth and that we as ourselves will receive our white stone or a celestial Urim and Thummim, our resurrected bodies, along with it, and will be tied to this planet forever. That's the receiving our inheritance and talking like in an eternal exalted perspective. I hate that I just verbal dumped on you guys and then I got a jet.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. I mean,
but is that okay?
Yeah, we find it super interesting. Kevan already talks to me about a lot of stuff, and I think it's real interesting to like listen to it with you know an open idea to it, and just also understanding better the tradition that you know I came from, and I think it's because I didn't know some of this planet stuff. I didn't know you knew about some of this planet stuff, Kevan. Yeah,
I mean a little bit, but not like Leiland does though.
Yeah, it's interesting.
This is where I consider myself a subject matter expert. Okay, but again, like how do you express that to people who don't care about this to begin with, or don't even know that this topic exists? When I come at them with planetary stuff, they take it like Kwaku as somebody going off the rails talking about esoteric things they know nothing about. But that's not the case here at all with me. And in fact, every time I talk about these things, I will exhort everyone I talk to get yourself to the temple. How do you understand these things? How did I understand these things? It was through my serious and dedicated study of the temple. It was by studying the symbols on the temple and doing it in faith and not doing it to find some alternative out for my sins that I want to keep doing. But it's to change my life.
It's all there. I mean, if it's like all there in the writing and stuff.
Yeah. So thank you for this opportunity.
No,
I would love to come back.
It's real interesting for sure. Yeah, because we didn't even get to the general thing. Kevan and I talked about. We mentioned a little bit, but we wanted to talk about the eagle and that stuff. And,
yes.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely like to do. Yeah.
Maybe even later today, if you guys have time. I'm not sure what you guys look like. I'm gonna go clean and then come back, and then I'm free. But actually, no, let's push it off to maybe another week, if you would, and then we can real prepare and just have like a deep dive into Ezra's Eagle, and we can tie some of these alternative ideas from like the esoteric cosmology section and bring it more to government, bring it more to politics, to where it's applicable to what people are experiencing and seeing today. They're being drawn in this to and fro battle of left, right, and ideas.
Yeah,
but if
Chris
we
and I
see
get
it from
into
this,
a lot of this stuff too. So I mean that'll be a little.
If we see it from this prophetic position,
discussion.
yeah. This prophetic view, though, just really, in my mind, makes sense of it all. Like there's no argument to me that's convincing otherwise. And that's why I feel like everybody spins their wheels and gets their emotions all up in these spins unnecessarily when we have this peace and calming influence that the temple's like, hey, I'm right here. We were good. You need to just chill out and do what the prophet says, kind of thing. So that's my final message. And then I got to bounce.
Nice. Yeah. We'll let you get to it. And yeah, we'll do another one. I'll pop this up. I'm not gonna, like I said, I was only recording because I didn't know if we'd hit glitches with connecting and all that sorts of stuff, and maybe there'd be like little periods of 10 minutes I had to cut out because of stuff not connecting or not getting you able to share your screen. I had no idea it was gonna go, but I don't think there's much to edit from this, so I think I'll probably just pop it up as is.
Cool.
Cool. Sweet.
Yeah.
Good combo, guys. Sorry, I kind of diarrhea of the mouth there a bit.
No.
Last stuff.
That's great. I mean, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Thanks,
I got
Guatemax, for setting it up.
Yeah, thank you, Guatemax.
Yeah.
We'll bring more of the Kwaku stuff into it next time, maybe.
Yeah, and Dan McLennan also did a similar thing with Baal that you had mentioned in the tweet.
Yes, yeah.
That's a similar thing. They go close to it, but then, yeah. It's
we
the
can talk
same
about that.
story. It's always the same story. Yeah.
Let's plan on that for the next time. Let's do Ezra's Eagle, and then I want to go into Velikovsky's ideas because he's really foundational in understanding the planetary piece and these alternative ideas of like Passovers and what the real fight is in popular science right now. It's not what everybody else thinks. It's what I think, and you have to listen. No, I'm just kidding.
Sweet.
All right, guys. Take it easy.
All right. Thanks
Bye.
a whole
Thanks,
lot.
Lynn.
Okay.
Later.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He knows what this stuff is. But we have the departments in within this not individuals, different talents, different voices that they just get shaded away. There's a blacklist, and you just the people say, oh look, these very few people, these very crazy ones, they represent the whole, but that's not the reality of things. And that's how it is like a community. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is
it's
something I wanted to share.
It's for sure real interesting. And I mean, Kevan talks to me about a lot of stuff, a lot of the things I didn't know, or even, I mean, obviously I was no sort of like great understander or historian of all that stuff. I think it's super interesting to get into all that stuff and the cosmos ideas that come out of the temple.
Sweet. Cool.
Okie-dokie.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for setting it all up, Guatemax.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
looking
Guatemax.
more and
Yeah.
keep learning more, talking more about this stuff and seeing where, how it all connects. So
Yeah.
Okay.
thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you guys later. Bye.